Hey guys, Loman02. I'm going to be doing some Canadian Highlander content today. What you have in front of you is a Jesaki control deck. So, for those that are not familiar, and maybe this is the first time you're viewing any of my content, Canadian Highlander is a 100-card singleton format accepting basic lands that has no ban list, so you're able to play any cards throughout the history of Magic. The caveat to that is that per 100 cards in your 100-card deck, you get 10 points to attribute to putting in some of the most powerful cards in the game of Magic. So you have 10 points, and certain cards are worth more than 1 point. In the case of my deck, I'm playing Ancestral Recall, which is my most heavily pointed card. It is a 7-point card, as well as Dig Through Time at a single point, Mana Drain at a single point, and then Spellseeker at a single point as well. This format's very, very cool. I think it's kind of like a brewer's paradise. You get to make a lot of different very cool decks. Templating is very fun in it, based on your meta. And in general, you just get to play a lot of interactive games. So if you get bored of like Vintage or Legacy, because I would say this format plays out probably most like Legacy in general, and in some cases Vintage, it's a very fun format to get into. That all said, the deck that you have in front of you is really not a brewer's deck. This deck is templated a little bit, but in general, Jeskai is a pretty stock list. I think Jeskai, has a little bit of mutability to it in regards to taking it more to an aggro control role or a control role. But in general, a lot of the cards that are used in this list are pretty stock. So I ended up playing this deck in a league structure, really more of a short tournament, like our long tournament, short league, 2-day event where basically you played as many players as you could in a league queue, and I managed to get in 10 games with this deck. I ended up choosing this deck because I didn't really know, one, it was the first time that anyone had run a league over the Canadian Highlander Discord, for MTGO specifically. Folks have been running leagues for X-Mage for a while now, and I didn't really know what to expect from folks, so I was like, I figured I'd kind of either go with the Jeskai, mid-range control. I consider this kind of more, it's a control deck, but it's more of an aggro control deck, or it can assume an aggro control role, which gives it more flexibility than like a hard control list like blue-white control. I figured I kind of liked going this route or into 4-color blood. 4-color blood because I have a lot of repetitions on the deck and I spent a lot of time, developing my own list for 4-color blood, and I also think it's pretty match neutral. The one thing that it loses down to is speed combo, whereas I think Jeskai Control gives you a little bit more of a match neutral setting going in, so that you can take games long and then hopefully allow play experience or skill, to kind of see you through. Where decks like this deck are not going to shine is going to be in like sometimes the speed combo matchups, because the deck is a Xerox engine style deck, and for those that are, I guess unfamiliar with the term Xerox as it applies to Magic theory, all Xerox theory really means, or how it originally was developed, and it was coined by a guy named, it was named, I don't know by whom, but the ideology behind Xerox was actually developed by a guy named Alan Comer, an old professional player, and what it was is that through use of cantrips, you could play less lands and accrue virtual advantage over your deck. That's expanded over the years to mean more than just using cantrips to reduce land count and gain virtual advantage in cards, and kind of mutated into also meaning that you can play more situational cards, situationally good cards. Like Swords of Plowshares is a great card. No one would ever say it's a bad card, but it's a situationally good card, right? Because sometimes you're playing in a control matchup where your opponent may only have one creature, and Swords of Plowshares is just a trapped card in your hand. Being able to not draw it and instead draw something like Negate in that matchup is just better. So the use of cantrips gives, and/or mass draw effects like Ancestral Recall, gives the deck a lot of mutability in selecting by pilot's choice what cards you want to have access to at what point in time you want to have access to them. That said, Xerox decks do tend to assume some risk in the early game because in general they need to establish their Xerox engine before they can really get it online. But in the long game, it gives you a significant edge against most opposition. It allows you to control the variance of the game, i.e., in general, you're able to draw what it is you want to draw when you want to draw it, once you have enough mana to use the engine. Alright, so that out of the way, this is the deck that I opted to run. I'm going to do a very hasty deck on it, but I'm not going to go too in-depth on it. The list is up. If you go to the Canadian Highlander Discord, you can pull my list. I think it's just called Jeskai Control from the league details. But in general, I just want to kind of quickly cover how the deck is constructed. So I have this deck broken into 5 columns. The first column on the far left, consisting of 32 cards, is the committed mana base. Now, I have more lands than 32. I obviously have 37 because it says it right on top in the deck title line. But some of my other lands I've attributed as having separate purposes than solely providing mana. But one of the things you'll find in the Jeskai list is that a lot of the cards can actually switch lanes between columns. But before I go into how the lands are broken down, let me explain these columns. So the second column that you have here is my card draw or card filtration. This is essentially the Xerox component of the deck. These are the cards that allow me to choose whether I want to get lands, whether I want to get removal, whether I want to get permission, or whether I want to get a threat. So it basically allows any cards in my deck to mutate, or allows these cards specifically to mutate into what effect I want at the given point in time. And that's kind of the heart behind the deck and how it operates. So you see I have 21 cards that I've kind of attributed to Xerox. That said, as we start going through the piles independently, you'll see that a lot of the cards have bleed over and a lot of mutability between which pile they can go into. Take, for instance, Torrential Gearhulk, Consecrated Sphinx, or Snapcaster Mage. They could be anything. Consecrated Sphinx is a threat, but it's also drawing you extra cards, which is kind of a Xerox effect, right? Snapcaster Mage can be point removal, it can be more Xerox, it can filter your draw, or it can counter spells. The third column here is just my point removal. So you have, Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, a whole boatload of red removal, a Braid for artifact removal, Electrolyze, which is, kind of a Xerox card, but also draw. Fire Ice can be Xerox to filter a draw out and also buy some tempo off tapping their lands, but also removes, 1 to 2 things. Warrior's Helix, cards overperformed. 4 is really important. That's why you'll see we're running a card like Flame Slash, so 4 toughness can be very important. And I also put Wasteland in here. It's a point removal spell. I don't treat it generally as a mana source, although it can do that as well. You go into this fourth column here, and you have my threats. Like I said, a lot of these threats can bleed over into other columns, but generally speaking, you just have the most efficiently costed threats. Now, this is not the lowest to the ground aggro control Jeskai list, which would tend to run stuff like Delver, and other cards like that, maybe Monastery of Swiftspear, or Is It Blitz style cards. It does have a Young Pyromancer, it does have Monastery Mentor, because these are the kind of cards that, you can just resolve one of them, and then just sit back and play control, and they'll just win you the game on their own. But a lot of the cards are mutable inside my threat pile. I also have 2 lands in the threat pile because Celestial Colonnade and Wandering Fumarole, if they did not turn into creatures, would not be in the deck because coming into play taps lands is generally a risk. Going into this last column here, this is my permission. So I have 17 permission spells. Realistically, a lot more than that, or the deck plays like it has a lot more than that. And actually, Ojutai's Command can go over here too, so technically I believe more than that now. And actually, let me check. Yeah, Mystic Conflict should be over here because I say the numbers didn't make sense. 19. I think when you start looking at it though, like Cryptic Command, Ojutai's Command, Mystic Confluence could go over into the Xerox pile as well because they all replace themselves or draw cards. Same could be said of Miscalc. Like I put Irrigated Farmland into the Xerox pile because it cycles, which means that it's a card that can be a land but is also mutable into something else if I need something else. At that point in time in the game. And a lot of cards have those effects. So as you start looking through these piles, this is how the deck's broken down. I would say the core of the deck is actually the second column of 19 cards, because that's what allows the deck as a function of Xerox to actually operate and allows it to, it basically gives it its power. You look at a card like Ancestral Recall and you can say that's the card that gives it power, but no, it's really the mutability of cards over the course of time in the game, which allows the pilot at the end of the day to control variance, i.e., you're not committed to top decking well. Sometimes you are, because that's just Magic, and sometimes you don't get there on being able to look at 10 to 20 more cards than your opponent. But oftentimes, if you're able to look at 10 to 20 more cards and you have the time to do that, and you're not at a vast tempo disadvantage on board, you can generally win the game pretty easily. That said, what is the deck looking to do? It's looking to use the most efficient 2-for-1 answers on creatures to kill, permanent-based resolve permanents that are on board. Use the most efficient threats that generally have spells matter clauses on them or interact well with spells or come into play at flash speed. And then interact on the stack with a boatload of permission, and then use all of the best card draw and best card filtration to choose what it is you want to draw at any given point in time, whether that be mana, point removal / answers, threats, or permission-based answers to threats that your opponent may play. So that's the list. It's pretty simple. At the end of the day, what it really boils down to is it runs a committed, basically, at the end of the day, a committed 33 to 34 mana sources. It does have more mana sources than that, but a lot of them are not committed or templated as mana sources. They're templated as spells. It runs about 16.5% threats, 16.5% Xerox or draw / filtration effects. And I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. So it's about 16 and a half, 16 and a half, 16 and a half for point answers, threats, and card filtration, and then a little bit greater volume of permission, because oftentimes one of the things you'll find with this version of Jeskai Control is it really isn't. It's not the best at getting back from when it's behind, because you don't have effects like Terminus or Wrath of God or Supreme Verdict to board wipe. So if your opponent gets an early advantage, you're not able to interact along a curve, then you can run into issues. But because the deck is running so much card filtration, it's generally able to get cards like Electrolyze, like Lightning Helix, like Fire Ice, like Forked Bolt to kind of deal with the board along a curve. So the plan is to interact along a curve with your opponent and then eventually exhaust them of cards, and through your mass card draw, find a threat, resolve the threat, protect it with the 1 to 2 extra counter spells that you've been holding in hand because you're up on cards over your opponent, and then just win the game that way. It's kind of how it controls. Whereas, like, you'll see other Jeskai builds can go more controlling, where they'll play like Settle the Wreckage and stuff like that, and probably a few less creatures. But at the end of the day, the one thing I like about this style of build, that's kind of why you'll tend to hear me call it Jeskai mid-range control. It's really kind of like Jeskai aggro control, but it's more on the control side. The C is a little bigger on the dash side of the AC. For it is that this deck is very flexible, which I think does give some percentiles of advantage to play experience and pilot experience, in Magic in general, because it allows you, given game state, to choose what it is you want to be doing. I'm going to go into the league gameplay here momentarily, and you'll see in a lot of our games, we do just sit back and play control, and in some games where I'm playing against like blue-black or like Esper control, and I just think my opponent has a more controlling deck than I do, I'll just go aggro, and I'll be looking for threats and trying to just resolve a threat, and then like basically in those style of games, like the last threat standing is the one that kills them, and you just protect it or stop their most relevant stuff, because eventually answers are going to run out, and if they have to answer everything, then they're going to be reacting to you, and when opponents are reacting to you, I tend to find that me personally, because I'm a little bit more of an aggressive player, an assertive player in the game of Magic, I tend to like that. Even when I play control, I want my opponent reacting to me or being scared of what I have, because that means I can control the pace of the game. And if I'm controlling the pace of the game, even if I'm behind on board, I often find that wins me more games of Magic. That said, guys, quick pause. I'll be back momentarily for the first game in the league, and we'll be back here soon. Alright guys, back for game number 1. So we open on this hand. This hand looks great. I don't know what I'm playing in the dark. I do know that NashDT, and I can't say his moto name, but that's his name on Discord, tends to play more aggressive decks, but he plays a variety of decks. This hand is lacking white mana, but it does not have any white cards, but it does have a mana drain. It does have a Fire Ice to either buy tempo against creatures or to, buy some tempo to tap one of their lands down and buy some time and maybe wasteland them. It's probably a land too rich, but I don't really treat wasteland as a land. I treat it as kind of a spell for reasons of playing the deck. So I have a little bit of time on this hand to develop into a threat. The one thing the hand is lacking is a threat, right? Then I find Search for Riskanto. I would love to slam that, but I feel like against a mountain, I probably want to leave up both Spell Pierce and Mana Drain to see if I can get lucky here. And I'm glad I do, because I'm able to get the on-crop Crasher here. Go ahead and go to my turn. I draw a white card, which is a little unsettling because I don't have the ability to cast that right now with my current holdings. But I do have a Search for Riskanto I can play off the Mana Drain, and I can still leave up Spell Pierce. I do go ahead and Wasteland their City of Traders, which may seem like low value because the thing is likely to get sacked on their turn. But we see them play an Atarka's Command, trying to dome us for 3, and also play an additional land. So it's pretty apparent to me that they are very heavily trying to develop their mana situation because they kind of got blown out by that Wasteland, that low-value Wasteland play on City of Traders. I really didn't want them at 4 mana on turn 3 there, so that's kind of why I went that line. And right now, it looks like they're probably color screwed because they're not playing anything out. I play on an Aven Mind Sensor, top surveil with Search for Riskanto here, find Vendilion Click, which I'm happy to keep because right now they're not doing anything, and I have a counter spell and a removal spell, and I'd prefer to actually just try to win the game if I can, even though it looks like their deck is probably more aggressive than mine. I go ahead and look at their hand. They Tarfire me in response to me looking at their hand, before I get to look at their hand. I see that they have Kessig Wolf Run, a Blood Moon, which is kind of spooky, Hijitsu Second Right, which is, if you're not familiar with Hijitsu Second Right, it basically says if a player is exactly at 10 life, it does 10 damage to them, basically wins the game. But it's irrelevant otherwise. Chandra TOD is not possible for them to cast right now. Because they have Blood Moon, when they go for Berserk on my Aven Mind Sensor, I get the damage in, but I actually plow it because I really want to have at least one Plains in play when they go ahead and Blood Moon here. They obviously drew an Emerald for the turn, which is not really great for them because they're still short on red mana, basically. I do know that Chandra TOD is coming up next. I'm happy to keep a Preordain here. Find Condescend plus Jace. I believe I top both. Condescend's great here, obviously, because I can actually Condescend a Chandra even with a land drop. So I go ahead and Condescend here. Actually, in retrospect, I think I actually bottomed the Jace. I actually think at this point I was looking for a win con. The JVP is not really great with Blood Moon because I don't have a ton of blue mana. I do keep the Mystic Confluence because if they play something relevant on their next turn, I'll counter it and draw whatever or however many cards I can after paying multiple mana leaks. But if they do nothing again, if they gotta get unlucky and draw Windswept Heath, which is what they drew for the turn, then I'll just go ahead and Mystic Confluence to draw 3 here. Just turn it into Ancestral Recall. As you can see, my draw was not very good. I end up ditching the Searing Spear. Of note, I'm not flipping the Search for Iskanta because Search for Iskanta is basically just a mountain after I flip it. It does not become the Sunken Rune because of Blood Moon, so it's better just to have a Surveil effect every turn. They finally draw a live card here and get Chandra Pyromaster. I just go ahead and hardcast Force of Will. I do need to be a little bit leery of Price of Progress in this game. I find Tithe, I bin Tithe, draw again. I'm kind of getting unlucky with my draw steps, but, we have Search in play, so this over time should benefit us. They have to probably think that they're, in a lot more trouble than they actually are at this point, because I haven't drawn very well. I've drawn a ton of lands. Find an Abrade. Definitely keep the Abrade, because I want to answer the Rampaging Ferocidon. I don't want to give them a bunch of incremental damage off their 3-3 here. Not that I play a ton of creatures, but it's actually really good against certain creatures that I run, like Pyromancer. They draw a Rurik Thar here, which is a big gentleman. I see a Torrential Gearhulk on top, which I got lucky on that draw step, but being fair, I've gotten rather unlucky on my draw steps previously up until Abrade and Torrential Gearhulk, so I haven't been hitting exceedingly well. They go ahead and attack with Rurik Thar here. I'm going to have to take 6 damage off of my Torrential Gearhulk Path to Exiling this, but this gives me what I've kind of needed this entire game, which is onboard advantage with a 5-6, and if they haven't drawn into a relevant card to cast post-combat, then I'm going to be in very good stead. You see Ancestral Recall, and that's not a card you pitch back. Not a card you pitch back at all. I get Lightning Bolted here and nothing else. So I'm down to 11, but I get to Recall here, and I'm very happy. I bottom the days. I'm very happy to see an Absorb here because that means that it's going to be very difficult to race me, with Burn. I get an attack in here, put them down to 4, and they see their draw step and just pack it in and concede. So quick pause, guys. I'll be back momentarily for game number 2. Alright, guys, back. Maybe this was game number 2. Alright, quick pause again, guys. I think I opened game number 1 up again. I'll be right back. Alright, here we go, guys. This is game number 2. I guess I accidentally reopened game number 1. What this hand's lacking is blue mana to cast Disallow, and it's generally a pretty blue-heavy deck, but it has a lot of white mana. It has a threat, and it has an answer to an onboard threat from them in the form of Chain Lightning. It also has Karakas for possibly some minor value if they, get a legend down early. They go ahead and suspend a Rift Bolt, which is pretty aggressive. I just play out the Volcanic Island. I don't know if I should have done that in retrospect, but my thinking was, it helps me control sequencing by turn 3. And it has a greater bluff value than Plateau does. It bluffs Lightning Bolt, Spell Pierce, Spell Snare, etc. I draw to an Inferno Titan, and my thinking is here, I just need to make the game last long enough to get to Inferno Titan. Because Inferno Titan is a card that I kind of assess, them not being able to beat. One thing you'll note, I do just blow up the Eidolon. If I don't blow it up there, I'm committing myself to taking essentially 4 off of it as opposed to just 2. So while I could get some value off of it being in play, my opponent casting spells, I think I lose more value in not just getting rid of it immediately. I go ahead and cast out, or correction, I just go ahead and loot here. I don't even play the Mind Sensor because I think Mind Sensor is worse than looting here. I'm really just looking for, ways to gain life, effective card draw, good removal. Even Mind Sensor is not really a card I'm interested in playing in this matchup because it's just too small. It's not a fast enough clock. They cast the Rack here, and I make an interesting play here. The reason I absorb the Rack is not because the card is per se relevant, but because I can gain 3 life off of Absorb. So Absorb was kind of the world's worst Healing Salve here. And the reason that I think Healing Salve is relevant in this position is my opponent's Hellbent. They've got me at 5 prior to Absorb, and the reason 5 is relevant is because there are a lot of haste 5/5 dragons that cost 5 mana, and I would prefer to not die to those, and on the turn after tapping out for Inferno Titan, be able to attack with Inferno Titan, dome their dragon for 2, and dome them for 1, and then use Incinerate to remove the dragon. and stay alive at a healthier life total of 3 as opposed to 0. Inferno Titan does what Inferno Titans do and wins the game in very rapid fashion. This card is just a beast. Like, against the fair decks, Inferno Titan is basically Wrath of God plus, a 1 to 2 turn clock. So he does what he does, and he beats the living crap out of our poor red-green opponent. Good games, Dinesh T. One thing I'll say, and you kind of got to see it more so in Game 1, is the card filtration, even a little bit in Game 2 with Desolate Lighthouse, but the card filtration of the deck definitely gives it a edge advantage as the game goes longer and longer. So I didn't per se mind my opponent's game plan in the second game of just burning the living crap out of me with like a Tarkus Command, Flames of the Blood Hand. I mean, it wasn't really the most economic use of cards, but I don't think it was bad either, because I think they're kind of hoping to mise and not allow me to get to the long game, because once I get to the long game, it gets a lot more difficult for them to win, because I'm able to have so much control over what I draw, whereas they're just kind of hoping to knock the top of their deck. That all said, their hand was a little bit threat light. Well, I guess it wasn't horrible. They had Eidolon plus they had Mindspark. Actually, their hand was good. Like, I like their hand. I like their keep. I just think it's a tougher matchup if the game goes long. If they don't burn me out, early, and I get the Xerox engine online, and or I get a pretty monumental threat plus an untap, it's going to be really tough to dismount me from this position, because I've kind of got everything I need going for me, to include fast clock and access to numerous counter spells. That all said, guys, this is Game 1. I'm going to go on a quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for Game number 2 in the league. Alright, guys, we are back, and hand is perfectly acceptable. It has creature removal, it has counter magic, and it has a threat in the form of Thing in the Ice. Couldn't ask for much better. I mean, you could ask for an Ancestral Recall, and I'm a greed sack, but I'm not that greedy. I see a Treetop Village, and my assumption is probably 3 to 4 color mid-range or Hoof. I see Priest Titania, and suspicions are confirmed. This is a Hoof deck. I just play out Jace here. I could play out the Pyromancer to kind of get a threat on them, but the problem is that Pyromancer doesn't really synergize well with Thing in the Ice. I could have cast a Spellseeker here and tried to Ancestral on their turn, but I prefer to leave up Miscalculation in the early game. They go ahead and Wasteland me, which means that I'm off of Miscalc now, which is, not great for me, but at the same time it puts them down a land drop, which means they're not going to be able to play any relevant 4-mana Planeswalker, more than likely on this next turn. They also have Karakas. I'm kind of at a point in the game right now where I don't really mind actually Rashad importing them, because they're not doing anything that relevant right now. They go ahead and just, you bounced again. I fetch, do the fetch trick with Tithe, find 2 lands off of Tithe, then find my Plains land off of Marsh Flats as well. This is some cool card advantage right here. I do attack with Young Pyromancer here, so this is an interesting line by me. Like, this is a bluff attack, right? But I think it's a pretty free bluff attack. I'm kind of shocked they blocked. I don't think I would have in their position, because, on 4 open mana with red, white, and blue, like, it's very likely I can blow out this block here. So I think it's a pretty low-value block. I also think it's a pretty high upside attack for me, because putting them to 14 is actually relevant, because Thing in the Ice becomes a 2-turn clock at that point. The fact that, I am also going to flip Thing in the Ice and lose any value that I've gotten off Young Pyromancer and also put it back into my hand and have it be a 2-mana mana sink is kind of, it's kind of an argument for doing the chump attack with Young Pyromancer. I don't like the Treetop Village block. It ends up being right here, but I think in most cases, in most probable draws that I have or cards that I have, it's not correct to do it. But it works out for my opponents. They just eat my Pyromancer, and I don't get to do the damage. I play out Jace again because I'm going to force them to use their Karakas. Now, if I could also have cast out the Spellseeker and left up Miscalc and cast Ancestral, I probably would have done it. The game is misremembering itself, guys. I'm going to go on a quick pause and come back here momentarily, because this is actually not how this played out. Oop. Alright, guys, back. So the difference is we actually played a Tundra out here, so I didn't cast out Spellseeker and not leave up Miscalc and or Ancestral Recall on their turn. So I'm going to let it play from here, because this is actually how the game played out. I did not tap all 3 of my islands and not have a blue source to either cast Ancestral or leave up Miscalc. They cast out Incubation Druid here. I go ahead and Ancestral on their end step, bouncing my Spellseeker back to hand, which is likely to find a counterspell to maintain board advantage. I can recast the Spellseeker. I believe find Mana Drain here, which is probably my best card to find. I could see Brainstorm as well, because I have a fetch land in play, and I have some cards that I wouldn't mind getting rid of in hand. Then go ahead and recast the Incubation Druid. They just cast a bunch of dudes here. I let them. I could have fought them over some of these dudes, but I don't really want to spend my mana that way. I'd rather counter the must counters like Hoof. And a lot of these cards are kind of going to die to quote-unquote the Abyss, which is my Awoken Horror right now. It's kind of the Abyss. I go ahead and ponder here, find an Inferno Titan, which is a pretty huge pickup. Play my Plains. I actually don't slam Inferno Titan yet. I actually get down to Fairy to just further cement my advantage. I tuck the 0-2 because I want them to redraw that. They do not block with Voyaging Satyr, which is interesting to me because I think they're kind of in a must-block situation. Because of the Gitaxian Probe, I also know they have Tooth and Nail in hand, and this allows me to mana drain the Tooth and Nail. So that's kind of why, just to rationalize, I didn't go over it, but to rationalize why I didn't slam Inferno Titan there, it's because Tooth and Nail is a pretty big threat to me. If Tooth and Nail gets a Craterhoof Behemoth plus, Eldrazi Displacer, the Eldrazi Pig, or the new one, something Forerunners. Like, basically, if it gets 2 hoofs, it can do 20 damage to me with 2 hoofs, which is enough to kill me with only 1 toughness on board, because it would be 19 damage through. So I have to counter the Tooth and Nail, because it can just win on the spot. But in regards to 9-mana combos, Mana Drain tends to be good against my 9-mana combo cards with Entwined Tooth and Nail. At least at this position, better than Inferno Titan would have been. Although, looking at it now, if they didn't block the Awoken Horror, I could have post-combat tap or play the Inferno Titan just to win the game. So in retrospect, what I probably should have done, even though I think I sequenced this wrong, I think I should have attacked with Awoken Horror first, not played Teferi out main 1. The reason I did it is to look at options, look at what options I had available to me, or to see further options for later turns. So I think I was playing probably a deeper control game than I had to. What I probably should have done is just attack with Awoken Horror. If they didn't block and went to 1, just cast the Inferno Titan and won the game. Yeah, that would have been a more correct line. So going back and looking at it, that was the more correct line here. I didn't think there was a world in which they would not block. I figured they were just blocking 100%. Although we did kind of give them a tell earlier that we didn't have Burn in hand when they activated the Treetop Village and blocked my Pyromancer during the quote-unquote chump attack slash bluff attack. So, I guess, yeah, in retrospect we should have played that way. But I think I was in control mode, and I was like, all right, get Teferi down, get the untap, have Mana Drain the minimum up, and if I find some burn, cool, But I figured they were going to block the Awoken Horror. I think if I were in their position, I'd block Awoken Horror, because I think going to 1 against a deck with red cards in it's kind of rough. I think it gives you some loss in equity for sure. That said, guys, I'm going to jump out of this one and go into game number 2 against MTG Fanardic. Guys, back. That hand was not acceptable. It didn't have enough of anything it needed, to include mostly mana and/or cantrips. This hand's great. It's got Preordain, finds an Ancestral, which always makes most hands better. The one thing this hand's lacking is point removal right now, which you'll find here is a very big liability. Rofellos, they have one of their most busted starts. Rofellos is involved in the most busted starts for hoof decks. I think. There may be more busted cards than Rofellos. Rofellos is certainly more disruptible than stuff like Soul Ring and like Mana Crypt. But Rofellos, if unanswered, is likely more busted than either card. So we're on par to get, turn 3 or 4 hoofed here, turn 4 hoofed. Luckily, they don't have it outright. One thing they do here that kind of, gets me is they don't pop their fetch land, which means that the mana leak's actually not that far off from just getting them here. When they use Rofellos without popping the fetch land, because it takes them down 2 mana, essentially, without the Wooded Foothills popped. But I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose this game. Not being able to answer Rofellos early on this kind of draw, with them on the play and the draw that I have, is generally not going to favor me. So I know that they have Craterhoof Behemoth in hand now, so I go for a draw phase look, and unfortunately they've also top-decked well and gotten Primeval Titan. So I make a very interesting technical play here, or techie play here. I actually take the Primeval Titan, and the reason that I do that is because if they make the same misplay where they don't use Wooded Foothills prior to tapping Rofellos, Llanowar Emissary, then I can actually mana leak their hoof here, which would be a pretty big blowout in my favor. So I go for the highest upside play, which is my opponent misplaying, because I'm not beating either card. If they use Primeval Titan or they use hoof, I can't beat either card. I'm already probably dying to this board situation right now, but if I can mana leak a hoof and stay alive, there are possibilities, there are outs for me, because I do have a Spellseeker, which is able to actually get Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile, and allow me to remove the Whisperwood Elemental. Gives me, a couple turns of chump blocking the Woodland Bellower, and/or, basically eating some of the elves if the elves have to start attacking. So I didn't think I was quite dead when I cast the Vendilion Click, hoping that they drew into a basic land card or something like that. But when I saw Primeval Titan, I knew I was dead to either card, so I took the card that I knew they could cast if they made the same line, or if they took the same line where they didn't pop the Wooded Foothills prior to tapping Rofellos, to capitalize on the possibility of a mistake. So, all of that nonsense said, I still was pretty sure I was losing, but I think it was the highest upside for me. So, I ended up losing this one to a fast hoof draw. I'll be back for game number 3 against Fanardic. Alright, guys, back. This hand is, it's keepable. It's banking heavily on Ponder and Impulse. I do see what I want to see with Ponder. I see 2 lands, and I see a 6-drop, which is not exactly what I want to see, but 2 lands is enough. This hand, all it wanted is lands. I cast the Thing in the Ice out because I think secretly this card is great tech against Hoof and against White Weenie decks. It just buys so much tempo. And when so many other cards are predicated on having Mana Dorks in play, it can just buy 2 to 3 turns pretty easily. I go ahead and Impulse here. I actually just take the Plains. I was impulsing again for lands because this was a one-lander. It was a greedier hand, but it kind of got there off of the 2 cantrips. And that again is the power of Xerox. I could Chain Lightning this guy. I could have countered that guy, the Aven Mindcensor, but I don't opt to do it because right now it's not really stopping me from anything. I go ahead and cycle Miscalc here to get deeper in my deck and really just to ensure that I can make a land drop. Now that I have Torrential Gearhulk in hand, I'm in a world where I want to actually make land drops so I can get value off my yard and Torrential Gearhulk, which is a good clock. And part of my game plan here is actually setting up a pretty strong value line to get Torrential Gearhulk down and then use the spell that I cast off of Torrential Gearhulk to flip a Thing in the Ice and get my Torrential Gearhulk back for a secondary casting, which is a big game. They cast Nissa, Voice of Zendikar here, so I make an interesting play here. I think if you just looked at this play in a vacuum and didn't look at my hand, and you knew that I had Condescend and Counterflux, not condescending the Nissa, Voice of Zendikar would be probably a misplay because Condescend, obviously loses value against a deck that can make a ton of mana, i.e. Hoof. But the reason that I Counterflux here is because if I hit a land on my following turn, I can actually cast Torrential Gearhulk. I cannot recast Condescend for any value outside of just getting a Scry with Torrential Gearhulk, but I can recast Counterflux as a hard counter spell against something with Torrential Gearhulk. And it also sets up my highest value line, which is hit a land, cast Torrential Gearhulk, cast Counterflux, counter their spell, flip the Torrential Gearhulk back to hand off the Thing in the Ice, activating to push all non-horrors back to hand. So, I think we're in a great place here, and I really like this line. Because it just accrues so much value. And they're behind on mana right now, but they're actually up on cards against me. But I've kind of set up my draw in a way where, despite a light mana draw, the cantrips are able to kind of get me into a mana-rich draw eventually. They cast out a Wild Growth here, use the Quirion Ranger to make 2 mana, essentially. Cast down a Thragtusk, or Swagtusk, as they call them. I cast out the Torrential Gearhulk, targeting Counterflux, which again, is better than Condescend in my graveyard at this point. I do go ahead and Counterflux that duder, and now I have up Torrential Gearhulk, Condescend, a bunch of burn. They're on 4 mana, and they're on what amounts to essentially a 2-turn clock, depending on how they end up playing this. I end up Condescending this, because I figure I could just burn off with a Braid, EOT, any other threat they play, i.e. their 1/1. I believe I keep both cards. At a minimum, I definitely keep the Dig Through Time. I go ahead and just Braid this dude so I know I can get through for damage this turn. I go ahead and activate the the Celestial Colonnade, burn them for 3 off of Chain Lightning, and then hit them for 11 down to -1. So that's kind of the power of Awoken Horror / TT Thing in the Ice in this matchup. I really like the tempo it can buy you. And sometimes it can turn a losing board situation into a very winning board situation because a lot of their cards, Green Hoof is kind of like a fair combo deck in a way. A lot of their cards just make a bunch of mana to get 2 to 3 cards into play that allow their mana producing cards to actually become relevant threats. But at the end of the day, their threats, if they don't have that kind of draw, are not that good. They're just 1/2s and 1/1s and 2/1s and just random mana dorks that synergize well with Hoof. But as you can see here, using the Awoken Horde to kind of buy all of that tempo and also get value of Torrential Gearhulk was enough to push us over the top. Despite them having a 6-card hand to our 2-card hand, we have onboard mana advantage and we have threat advantage on board, and we were able to push it into the win column. That said, guys, quick pause, and we'll be back for game number 3 in this league. Alright, guys, back. So I don't know what Mudra Man's playing. That first hand was unkeepable. It had 1 mana source and no cantrips. This hand, depends on the matchup. This is actually like one of the probably the best hands you could possibly see against like control. You just want to make land drops against control. Against aggro, this hand is kind of medium, but it really depends on when Ancestral hits. Against mid-range, maybe good enough. Just really, again, it depends on when Ancestral hits. So you're not going to toss a hand like this back. I do bottom the Celestial Colonnade, though, because I'm pretty set on lands at this point. I just want to draw non-lands. I go ahead and Ancestral Recall myself on my turn. I see a Watery Grave, and I know that by their next turn, I don't want to run into a Spell Pierce on their upkeep. Yes, I lose a card this way, but I think it's well worth it. And I'm very happy to see blue, because the hand that I capped ended up being a very good keep against blue. One of the things I've kind of found from playing this format for kind of a short duration, but I played a lot of 100 card historically, but just not powered 100 card, is that Ancestral Recall may be the most bananas card, but in an insidious way in this format. In the blue matchups, if you resolve an Ancestral, it's basically like you chop one of your opponent's legs off in a fight. I think one of the common quotes from like the Victoria scene is that it's not the first Ancestral that kills them. In the blue matchup, I would disagree. First Ancestral I guess it doesn't kill them, but it's like hitting someone in the leg with a sledgehammer and then trying to say, hey, let's have a fair fight. Because like they're just behind so many resources. You'll see in this game that, resources end up, the Ancestral that we resolved on turn 1 ends up putting us ahead on those resources, enough that it's really relevant. It's what won us the game, even if it's not apparent, at the time we win, how we actually won. But it was all Ancestral. The extra resources is huge. So I go ahead and cycle my land here, find a counterspell, find another land, play another land. I'm going to keep pace with them on lands, and I'm up 2 cards at this point because I did ditch 1 card off Ancestral as essentially a minor loot effect. They're obviously well landed here, which is good for them because one of the things you don't want to do in the control mirrors is ever fall behind in the early to mid game on land drops. You want to fight card for card on land drops. That's why I think keeping hands that have like 4 to 5 lands is actually fine in the control mirrors. Sometimes, it'll bite you and they'll resolve an early threat, but they don't have a ton of early threats. And oftentimes they don't want to tap out for early threats and do a bunch of open mana because if they lose their early threat, then they can be in trouble. So basically the name of my game is this. I'm ahead on resources. I'm making my land drops on pair with them on their what appears to be a blue-black deck list. So all I'm doing right now is just waiting for them to make the first play. Like, I feel like the onus is on them with me ahead on resources. Eventually, I'll just make a play, make an aggressive line to put Monastery Mentor down. But I want to wait for them because, if they do go for something, which they do here on, like, Tamiyo the Moonsage, then I can just get them with a Cryptic Command, and then my following turn resolve a Monastery Mentor with Counterspell backup, and if they don't have a counter, which it's not likely that they will, then they'll have to use a removal spell on my Monastery Mentor, which means they're going to be tapping mana on their turn, and I can kind of just stuff them with my counterspells on their own turn, which is going to lead to a vast and, slowly accruing tempo advantage to myself. Well, I'm up on cards that I got, incidentally, from Ancestral Recall, which I mentioned initially. So, you look at hands, I'm at 6, they're at 4 cards in hand, we have mana parity, I'm up 2 cards, yay Ancestral, and that's kind of, the entire nature of this game comes down to that card specifically on turn 1, I think. That said, so I do want to cover a separate line that I think my opponent could have taken, and it's one of the ways that, like, the old Landstill mirrors used to play out. I do think that when you're in a position like my opponent's in right now, it actually behooves you not to play threats out. Like, you always play your lands, but you just keep everything else in hand. The issue you can force here is that because I Ancestral and I am up on resources, you can force me to discard the hand size first. Which means that if you're forcing me to discard a hand size, then I'm losing value, right? I'm not accruing value that way, and it gives you more looks at cards in your deck for ideally relevant cards if you're the opponent that's behind or the player that's behind on resources in hand. But basically it forces me to tap mana first or lose resources, not tapping mana. And generally speaking, the first to tap mana in blue fights tends to lose because the answers tend to be more efficient. Like, for instance, like Tamiyo's a 5-drop, I cast a 4-drop that drew me a card and also countered it. Ashiok's a 3-drop, I cast a 1-drop that countered it. So I'm accruing mana advantage that way. I'm not per se accruing card advantage, although I guess Cryptic Command is card advantage, but I'm accruing mana advantage that way. So I think what you want to do is try to accrue resource advantage virtually through forcing me to play things into your counter magic, generating more draw steps for yourself, and either forcing me to discard or play into open mana. I don't want to get into a position where I'm playing into open mana because I'm not a threat-rich deck, and if my spell gets countered, then I have to pretty much fight a counter spell, and then I could be tapped down on your turn, and if I'm tapped down on your turn when you're behind on resources, that means more of your cards are going to resolve. And if you have powerful cards like Tamiyo, you can resolve a Tamiyo, and then I have to deal with it on board, which is a lot harder than dealing with it on the stack in the deck that I'm running. That's kind of just a take on, I think, if I was in my opponent's shoes, how I would end up playing it a little differently. I think you just have to fight them on resource, or fight them on tempo, and virtual advantage through hand size. And then just, because they're making a lot of land drops, that line makes even more sense. They try to treachery here, but I just go ahead and cast a counter flux. If they have numerous counter spells, I don't want to lose the counter fight here. I really don't want treachery to happen. And then I still have a spell snare at this point as well. I go ahead and cast Forked Bolt. They're pretty much dead on the next turn. Monastery Mentor, banned creature card in Vintage, which is saying something about it. And yeah, when it resolves and it fights and there's no Wrath of God effects, it does some work. Now they have to struggle to get out of this. Now they have to tap mana to get out of this because I've got my onboard advantage resolved. So I'm fine fighting them. Fighting folks with Pyromancer or Monastery Mentor in play is great because even if you lose the counter fight, it still feels like you're winning. And here we still win the counter fight and also get their dig through time and have onboard lethal with the Searing Spear on the following turn. I go ahead and spear their face, and that's a lethal attack right there for game number 1. So in retrospect, just kind of cover, I think, the main point from the game. And Motorman, it's certainly not a ping on you, man. But I do think that if you're in these control mirrors and you're playing against Ancestral, if your opponent has turn 1 Ancestral like I just had it, and that's going to benefit me a lot. But I think the way that you can play against it more effectively is if you're in one of these draws, continue to just make your land drops and force them to discard first. There's actually a really interesting, and I don't know how many folks are Vintage viewers, but if you want to look up some history in the Vintage Super League, which has kind of turned into more of a fun event but used to have more competitive decks in it, there's a really interesting game between player Luis Scott Vargas and Stephen Menendian, where Luis Scott Vargas is essentially losing the entire game, even though Stephen Menendian has 4 Force of Wills in hand, can counter everything, has more counter spells in his hand than Luis does cards in his hand. And what Luis ends up doing is, because his opponent, is so stocked on these counter spells, is he plays in the way that I'm kind of explaining right now, where he forces, his opponent on a Mana Light Gush, Delver list, to go to a position where he needs to discard every turn. So that eventually Luis accrues virtual advantage through just having higher spell relevance. Because Force of Will is a 2-for-1, especially when you're on a Mana Light Gush deck, like what Steven was playing there. But when you're able to kind of keep parity, advantage on mana advantage, it makes sense to play that way, because your opponent's just going to have more cards, more resources, and likely more of them are going to be relevant because they've seen more. So the way you beat that is you just force them to keep on drawing and discarding, and if they play into the board, you answer it and force them to discard or to get rid of some cards by fighting you back, and then you get an untap of your mana, and with them tapped, a preponderance of their lands tapped out, and resolve your bomb spell. That's eventually what ended up happening in that game between Luis Scott Vargas and Stephen Menendian, but it's a very interesting game because I think it brought into question some of the ideology between tempo versus advantage theory, and how more pure control decks in the format, especially on a deck like Delver, where I believe Menendian sideboarded out a preponderance of his threats to bring in just more control cards. But some of the downsides to Xerox Theory, because the deck he was playing definitely embraced Xerox Theory, but Xerox Theory is always going to be benefited when it has a greater range of available card types. What I mean by that is Xerox Theory is benefited when it has a more evenly distributed distribution of threats, answers, and draw. Threats, answers, draw, mana. When you take Xerox Theory and you remove the threat column, which is what happened in the game that I'm talking about, you decrease the flexibility with which you allow the deck to. You decrease the flexibility of the deck in general. You give yourself less options, and at this point, machines have been built, or computers have been built to beat humans at the game of Go, which is a pretty complex game. And how does it do it? Well, it uses number crunching to maximize the range of possibilities that it has available to it in future plays. And that's kind of the entire idea behind Xerox, and that's why, like, in these positions, like when you're behind on cards and possibly equal on resources, I think the highest upside thing you can do is just increase your own range of options while forcing your opponent to, go to discards and choose which options they actually lose. You also give away a lot of this hidden information. Anyways, a lot going on in this game that I think is interesting, and I just, when I have a nut draw like this, I think, what would I do if I were in my opponent's shoes? Like, how would I play this? Because I feel like it's vastly unfair, but I also want to know, like, how would I play around it? Like, how would I go about it if I were in Mudra position? And I think that's how I would try to do it, because I think that's how you win more games in this position. Anyways, very interesting game to me. Like, I'm sorry I went on a long diatribe about it, but I think this is a really interesting situation. I think I won the game pretty easily, right? Because I had Ancestral. Like, I think it's tougher to lose from that position, but I do think it's very interesting to, like, put yourself in, like, the other side shoes and think through, like, all right, well, if I was in that spot, because I don't think this is fair, like, how would I get around it? Like, what do I think that the best line is for getting around it? And I think that's how I'd go. So hopefully that's at least somewhat insightful. Maybe it's not. Maybe you already get it. But I do think it's very interesting to kind of look through that. All right, quick pause, guys. We'll come to game 2 here momentarily. Alright guys, we are back. This hand's acceptable. It's lacking white mana, but it has a flash threat, it has a bunch of card advantage cards, it has a cantrip in the form of Brainstorm. I do go ahead and play out Steam Vents untapped. They are playing black, which means that discard is a viable thing, so if I get hymned or I get thought seized or duressed, I want to have Brainstorm to kind of tuck and hide anything that I may want to hide. Plus, playing Steam Vents out untapped also kind of gives me, like, a little edge in hidden information. It makes them think maybe he has Spell Snare, maybe he has Spell Pierce, and they don't play something. But the biggest thing is I just want to leave Brainstorm up. I'm not going to pop Brainstorm off yet, though, because I kind of want to keep it for value here. I'm not under threat, so Brainstorm's value is going to go up and up over time, especially the more looks I'm able to see to try to get a shuffle effect or, anything like that. So my opponent, plays a Vendilion Click on end step. I go ahead and remand it, just trying to look for more lands, really, because I want to get up on resource advantages here. And I really like this play from them. And actually, our own hand kind of has a similar plan, but it's a little slower to get into play. So what they ended up doing there is kind of accruing some virtual tempo advantage or virtual mana advantage by EOTing a card that I likely had to counter, so that they could unlock their mana on the following turn and lock my mana down on the following turn to play a pretty relevant card, which is Liliana the Veil. The one issue with Liliana the Veil in these mirror matches is that it's kind of, in a way, card disadvantage unless you can get rid of creatures, because you commit a card and the mana to putting Liliana on the board, and you have to discard a card and I have to discard a card. So I don't like it as much in these control mirrors unless you kind of have, some ways to abuse its uptick, and or you're playing against a deck that plays a lot of creatures, which I don't. But, the card's still very good here. It's still a threat that I need to deal with, because if it does ultimate, it's a big game. I go ahead and opt here, and all I'm looking for is land. I believe I discard JVP here. No, Brainstorm. I discard Brainstorm, which makes sense. I think JVP's next in the chopping block. I see an Impulse. I bottom an Impulse, find a Plateau, which is great, because I definitely want white mana. This is going to allow me to resolve an EOT Restoration Angel with Force of Will backup, and then, if I'm very lucky, ideally hit a land on the following turn and play out Teferi. So JVP goes the way of the bin. I don't think he's good against Liliana here, nor is he long for the world, likely. They discard a Toxic Deluge. They go ahead and Vendilion Click. I just get rid of the Oshitize command and play out the Restoration Angel to get an onboard threat. And then I get very lucky and hit my land, play Teferi, tuck the Liliana, and I have basically done the same thing back to them. I basically used their EOT to force action. They bit on it, and then I was able to resolve Teferi on a tap-out situation for my opponent. I now have the onboard threat. I have two onboard threats. I have a card engine, and I have an onboard threat, which is kind of exactly where I want to be with this deck. I also have Negate and Fire Ice in hand. Fire Ice templates very well against Creeping Tar Pit if they opt to try to take out Teferi, and Negate is just good against, like, probably 90% of their deck. When I hit Cryptic Commands, the game kind of, I think, goes to almost a statistical lock. Like, they have a lot of cards in hand, but they're way behind on mana here, and they don't have much going on the board. So I believe they opt to go for a Dig Through Time here. I just use my Negate, because Cryptic Command does counter more, and because I have such a vast mana advantage, I think Cryptic Command is just fine, even though it is a little bit more mana inefficient. Go ahead and Cryptic Command their Jace here. I actually bounce their Creeping Tar Pit to put them behind on tempo. The reason I do that is because I already have a card in, so this is an interesting thing. I think most folks would actually draw there, and drawing could be right, but what I actually like doing is bouncing the Creeping Tar Pit, because I really, in this matchup specifically, in the control matchup, I very much so value, and think it's correct to value, mana advantage, and by forcing them to play a tapped land, It means, one, that anything I may want to do that's proactive is going to happen on my turn. And two, it puts them back at land drops. If they have a land in hand, I basically just stone rain them for a whole turn, which is pretty big because it's going to be tough for them to play a threat and also leave up a counter spell to protect their threat on any given turn cycle here. And because I have onboard advantage with Restoration Angel and I still have a card engine with Teferi, I think I can afford to give up a card off of Cryptic Command to actually maintain my mana advantage that I have going on board. And they're at 6 off Resto, so they're very close to dead. I mean, right now I'm 2 points away from just killing them. I allow the Liliana to resolve here. They do kill my Restoration Angel. I believe I go for an EOT Fire Ice here. Get them for 1, kill the Liliana. Fine, Dig Through Time. Fetch. Believe I attempt to cast Dig Through Time, only paying the 2 mana for it, and Delving. They have a Remand as one of the cards in their hand. I'm fine with that. Remand's fine. I wait for the untap on my EOT with Teferi to untap both the lands that I had used previously, and then I go for a Dig Through Time again, exiling my entire yard. There's nothing that's that irreplaceable in there for Snapcaster, so I don't mind too much. I get very lucky here, and I find Lightning Helix and Torrential Gearhulk. This is exactly enough to kill them because the Angel has done a lot of damage, so I get to go ahead and Lightning Helix them and Electrolyze them for exactly 5, putting them down to 0. So that's the end of this control matchup. I think Game 1 was interesting from like a theoretical perspective. I don't think the game itself was like spectacular per se, but I think it's very interesting to kind of like look through like, hey, how do you beat the Ancestral on turn 1 in the control mirror? And the second game was kind of like, interesting as well because, we kind of had 2 very similar game plans where we both utilized our opponent's EOT to gain virtual mana advantage, and or like basically just like, relegating counter spells to moot by resolving a relevant EOT threat and a relevant main phase threat. Mine was just a little bit slower, and again, the first to tap out in the blue mirrors tends to lose the game. I think tends to still be true, not always true, but tends to be true. And here, it definitely ended up going that way. And it kind of comes down to Liliana of the Veil, too. I don't think I'm a fan of Liliana of the Veil in blue-black. I think the card is very, very powerful. But I think I actually tend to like Liliana the Last Hope better in that style of deck because Liliana the Veil is a weird card, right? Like, in control, it's fine against mid-range. I don't like it against aggro because generally you just get a 2-1 or, like, 1-1 mana dork or some nonsense. And then it just dies. It fogs for a turn. It fogs, like, 1 attacker. Against mid-range, I think it's fine because you generally can get a relevant creature card with it and then, possibly protect it. But the issue you kind of run into with it in this style of deck is, like, I think Liliana is more of a tempo-based card as opposed to a control card. She can eventually control by blowing up just a crap ton of permanents. But, I like her more in, like, decks like Jund, where, like, you are, kind of an aggro control deck in Jund. I mean, it's more of a... People will equate it more to being a control deck. But, it sees a lot of cards, but it also can attack really well. Like, my opponent's deck cannot attack very well. So, in decks that can't attack, I don't tend to like Liliana as much, But she's very, very powerful. That all said, she's very powerful, and she did get quite a few cards out of my hand. Although, at the same time, she's doing the same to my opponent. So, I don't know. I don't know about what I think of her in, like, more of a controlling blue-black shell. I think I tend to like to go the Last Hope route better over the Veil. Even though I do think in a vacuum, Liliana the Veil is a more powerful planeswalker, and she's probably, honestly, my third favorite. Teferi jumped up there a lot. I think in this format, Teferi actually may, in the decks he can be played in, be better than Jace the Mind Sculptor. But Jace and Teferi are both just dumb cards. Like, Teferi has just grown so much in my estimate. But Liliana the Veil is definitely up there in like the top 3 to 4 planeswalkers for me. The issue that Liliana has of the Veil specifically is that she goes in a more specific deck. I don't think she's as flexible as like cards like Teferi or Jace because like she actively denies options. She doesn't accrue options, whereas both Teferi and Jace accrue options, which means they have a greater range of decks they can go in over something like Liliana the Veil. Anyways, guys, quick pause, and we'll go into the next game in these match sets. Alright guys, we're back, and we're, being Luck Miser, sacks again. We have an Ancestral Recall, removal, 2 counter spells in this hand, it's great. Playing against Hoof, more than likely, or just some sort of Green Elves deck maybe, but likely Hoof. He played on a Remnant Excavator, which is one I don't see often in Hoof. It's pretty cool. Got me a little worried that maybe they have a Strip Mine combo. I Ancestral here looking for efficient removal. I actually go ahead and Lightning Helix the Arbor Elf here as opposed to the Remnant Excavator. Obviously, the highest downside is they have like a Strip Mine and they just lock me out of the game. But I know that 5 mana is a lot, or 6 mana is a lot spookier than 4 mana on the Hoof decks. So I go ahead and get the Arbor Elf because it double Stone Rains them. I get a threat down and start attacking them. They cast a Sylvan Scrying. What I actually opt to do here is increase my range of options, or to look at what options I have available, and I remand this before I mana drain it here. I find Lightning Bolt, so I actually allow them to do this, because if they do find like a Strip Mine or a Wasteland, I don't really mind losing a land, because I can Lightning Bolt the Remnant Excavator EOT. I just go ahead and get it here during their attack because they just get a basic land. They get a Savannah. So evidently they really want to cast their 6 drops. So I think my decision to blow up the Arbor Elf in the early game is actually being kind of validated here, or I assume that while I'm playing. Snapcaster, obviously pretty good with Ancestral Recall. And we're in a phase in the game where, like, you know, having drawn Ancestral Recall and getting to cast it twice off of Snapcaster Mage plus having it naturally is kind of put us in good stead to win here. I don't mind Ancient Tomb because at this point I can pretty much counter the world. They cast a Court of Calling. I actually allow this to resolve so I can also get more onboard pressure and play out my Aven Mind Sensor. They are able to find a Fyndhorn Elves, but I think for 5 mana or 6 mana, whatever that was, it's fine. They can definitely have a Fyndhorn Elves for 6 mana. And even if they had found the Fierce Empath, which is what I assume they were going for to find a relevant card, I don't think they would have. If they double found, like, you know, Fierce Empath into Dramoka or something like that, I'd be like, all right, well, I'm going to allow myself to get had by that. I'm fine with that. They go ahead and commit Ritual Seppuku here with their Ancient Tomb, which I don't blame them for. This is, 2 Ancestral Recalls is a savage beating. Anyways, guys, quick pause, and we'll be back momentarily for game number 2 in this match. Alrighty, guys, back. And, I'm sorry, Blizzard support. I double mised you. I got 2 Ancestral Recalls in my openers. It's just very lucky. So I have Ancestral. I have plenty of land. Probably one more land than I need, but it's fine. I have Electrolyze to deal with Mana Dorks, and I have Cryptic Command for the long game. I like this hand, and the fact that it has Ancestral just kind of ups the ante a bit. So they had to mulligan down to, I believe, 6, and they keep a Mana Light hand that has a lot of Mana Dorks. Electrolyze tends to be very good against that. I could discard 1 less card if I cast Helix on one of their things here, but I opt to just get rid of 2 of their mana. I go ahead and Helix the Devoted Druid, Wasteland the Razorverge Thicket, and the plan is here. I've drawn a threat at this point, which is Monastery Mentor. I'm going to play it on this turn and then leave up Spell Pierce. They obviously don't have an attack, and then on my next turn, if they don't do anything relevant on their EOT, I'm going to bounce draw. I'm going to bounce the Overgrown Battlement and draw with Cryptic Command, so that I can start getting good attacks in. And I can also miscalc it on the backswing. So at this point, like, the game feels pretty over. And again, you know, definitely on the back of Ancestral Recall, getting to find the Monastery Mentor, the threat that I needed to kind of lock up this early tempo advantage, early mana advantage, is huge. I get lucky again and find Inferno Titan. I just go ahead and slam it, blow up their Mana Dork, take them back down to 1 mana, and I believe they go ahead and see their draw step and concede here. No, they play on an Evanescence Pilgrim. They're being a sport about it, and they're playing it out. But they're very dead this turn. Like, all I have to do is attack. I burn the Evanescence Pilgrim out of the way. I can pump the Titan for 3, which is far more damage than I need because the attack on itself is lethal. So, you know, opponent, you know, had to mulligan down pretty far. Had, you know, an Electrolyze to kind of punish Mana Dork heavy draw, and Ancestral to kind of re-up into the threat that we needed to lock up the early tempo advantage. That's just kind of how she rolls. You know, sometimes you get lucky and, you know, you have your 7-point card, and sometimes, you know, they have to mulligan and they have to go into a hand that, you know, is a little more speculative in mana situation against red-based and white-based removal. That's kind of what you saw ended up happening here. And, you know, Blizz, I'm sorry for kind of the blowout game. This is probably one of the games I felt worst about, because I'm just like, we're not really playing Magic at this point. Just kind of I got lucky, he got unlucky. The draws just lined up poorly, but that's Magic and it happens. And I definitely appreciated the games. So anyways, guys, quick pause, and I'll be back for the next game in my matches. Alright, guys, we're back. We're playing a Spicy Napalm this time. It tends to, so far I've seen him play mostly black-red, like a black-red aggressive, kind of aggressive discard deck. Aggressive, yeah, it's a weird deck, but it's cool. It's a cool deck. I just go ahead and play out the Search for Escanta here. I get blackmailed. I show them, I believe, the Restoration Angel, the Restoration Angel, the Dire Fleet, Daredevil, and the Jace. I go ahead and just Dire Fleet Daredevil here because I can get Blackmail and possibly get a relevant card out of their hand unless they're holding a lot of mana. When I see that they have 3 lands, I'm kind of happy to see that. That's a pretty interesting piece of hidden information that I have available now. They can blow up my Dire Fleet Daredevil, and they have a gamble. The way they're going to use gamble is actually to hardcast, whatever they find here, which is a Bloodhall Priest that domes me for 2 and puts a 4/4 on the board. So I'm actually in kind of a little bit of trouble here. I can't just play Jace onto the board and expect that to work. I go ahead and cast Snapcaster Mage. The expectation here is I get to get a card deeper off of the Gitaxian Probe, and I'm going to be able to block the Bloodhall Priest and also cast a Braid on their EOT if they don't do something that I need to braid. So I get rid of the 4/4, which is good. I find Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, which is a huge pickup. I go ahead and just cast Teferi here. I tuck the onboard threat because I am at 6, and I know their deck runs stuff like Price of Progress and Burn, so I don't really want to go much lower. I go ahead and draw here off Teferi. Again, Xerox just going to start taking over the game here. Play a Jace the Mind Sculptor, draw a bunch of cards, keep a Burn spell plus the Swords to Plowshares. I plan on fetching to get rid of the other 2 cards. I don't think I need more Burn. What I need now is really like a threat that ends the game fast. So what I'm looking for is something like Consecrated Sphinx or Inferno Titan. Even Torrential Gearhulk would be fine, but I just need to end the game. I don't want to keep the game going because eventually they'll draw into the right cards. They'll draw into Burn. I go ahead and fetch, so I don't want the 2 spells that I had on top. I find a Plains, which is pretty medium. I go ahead and resolve a Young Pyromancer. Go ahead and tap main phase for Search for Escanta because the untap with Teferi is going to allow me to do it again on their turn. They have 2 answers to Young Pyromancer, so I could have answered one of those with the Spell Pierce, but I also get to search here, which gets the bad cards off the top of my deck. They draw back into Gravecrawler, which is fine. Not too worried about Gravecrawler here. I go ahead and bounce it with Jace. I don't want to take more incidental damage. I find the Mana Drain, which is pretty cool. Get to untap 2, which includes the Search for Escanta and Island, so I can use it again on their turn. This is, Teferi and Search for Escanta are just dumb. They get to work some overtime. They cast a Collective Brutality here. I just Spell Pierce it, which still allows me to leave up the Search for Escanta as well. Search, find Ojutai's Command, which allows me to gain life. Then find Inferno Titan. Draw a card, find Torrential Gearhulk here, which this is just dumb at this point. So I have Torrential Gearhulk, which is going to get back Swords to Plowshares and put a 5/6 on the board, and I get to also leave up Mana Drain. There's some decision-making in possibly casting out the Inferno Titan here. What I opt to do instead is just gain the life now. Swords to Plowshares, the zombie here. It wins a little bit more slowly, but it's a little more safe. And I've seen their top cards. I top them with Jace. And I know that by mana draining the Gurmag Angler, I'm going to be able to resolve the Inferno Titan on my next turn while leaving up multiple counter magic spells and Torrential Gearhulk on their turn, which can allow me to get back Ojutai's Command to gain more life, get back the Dire Fleet Daredevil, and have access to casting Sonic Seizure on their turn. But they just go ahead and pack it in. They just don't have it. They're just like, nope, done. Because they're dead on the next turn anyways to Inferno Titan. But if they drew a really relevant card, I can protect it with multiple counter spells plus Torrential Gearhulk here. So that's kind of some of the reasons I went with this line. It's a little more value-oriented, and I think it generated more options later on down the road with the Ojutai's Command line into gain 4, return 2 power or less creature, which would be Dire Fleet Daredevil, to remove a threat, plus get a 5/6 down. So, anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to go to game number 2 here momentarily. Be right back. Alrighty, guys, back. Hand looks great. It's got 2 removal spells. It's got, a Wasteland, which may or may not be relevant. It's kind of got a pseudo threat in the form of Celestial Colony. It's got Impulse to find, probably a card engine. So, I see a turn 2 Blood Moon. That's not really great for this hand. I have a basic Mountain, but I don't have basic anything else. But I do have a Lightning Strike to deal with a threat, although Lightning Striking a Dread Wanderer is not really my idea of a great time. I can counter here. I could cast out the Dire Fleet Daredevil, but I figure that, if they're holding cards in hand, they're probably removal or burn. And I'd like to get some value off Dire Fleet Daredevil here. I can still Force of Will, I can still Lightning Strike if I want to, but right now what I'm kind of hoping to do is get lucky and draw into some lands. And I do draw into an Island here, which is very lucky. That's very good for me. It's going to allow me to Impulse. If you weren't aware, because Moto's going through it at a faster pace, Simian Spirit Guide was used to cast the Moon. That's how they got the Moon down on turn 2. I don't often see that card used in more aggressive decks. I think it tends to burn through cards too fast. But getting a Blood Moon down against my deck on turn 2 against the draw that I had was pretty good. Find another basic island on top, which is really good fortune. We're kind of just shut off of our white cards now, and/or casting something and leaving up counter magic on our opponent's turn. That's going to be one limitation with Blood Moon in play. They have Key to the City, which is a pretty cool card. This is actually, I haven't seen this card since draft, but the card was really good in draft. They get to cast a Dark Withering. I go ahead and remand the Dark Withering. I'm not going to be able to block this Dread Wanderer. The reason I actually remand there is just to get a card deeper. I'm basically bottoming anything that's not a basic land or a relevant spell. There is an argument to not casting or not playing out more lands here, but because I'm going to have to hardcast Force of Will, or I expect that I'll be hardcasting Force of Will, I kind of want my mana resources, but it plays around Price of Progress a lot less. I just go ahead and Force of Will it. Also, because I don't have access to fetch lands, I think brainstorming effects have kind of gone down in value, so keeping lands in hand or sacking lands isn't really doing me many favors. I find a Consecrated Sphinx, which is like, alright, well, Consecrated Sphinx is probably a game ender here. I accidentally flip Escanta. That was a misclick on my part. It wasn't a misplay, it was a misclick. Obviously, you don't want to flip Search for Escanta with Blood Moon in play, because you lose a significant amount of value that way, because you lose your Surveil, and Escanta the Sunken Ruin is solely a mountain when there is a Blood Moon in play. I do resolve a Young Pyromancer here, and I feel pretty safe because I have Counterflux available to me, and I also have Torrential Gearhulk available to me to counter anything that may be highly relevant. I am looking for a good way to race this setup, though. What I end up finding here is Ochitai's Command, which is pretty cool. Key to the City obviously loses some luster. It's a draw card when you're playing against Consecrated Sphinx. Ochitai's Command is interesting because I can actually discard it and recast it with Torrential Gearhulk to kind of gain some advantage. So I'm at approximately 1 million cards in hand. I'm obviously attacking because Key to the City does not allow me to block. So, I'm not on the blocking plan here. They go ahead and draw here again. I get to draw some more cards. I did discard the Ochitai's Command. So basically, I discarded Ochitai's Command because I don't have access to white mana. I can actually discard it to actually fix to cast it off of Torrential Gearhulk, which is what I do here. I cast out the Torrential Gearhulk. I actually get Ochitai's Command back. I gain 4, and I return a creature with power 2 or less, which is Direfleet Daredevil. Getting the Direfleet Daredevil back, I cast my opponent's Abrade. I just blow up their Dread Wanderer. In a game that I expect could go longer than this, I could Abrade their Key to the City, but I think here it's better just to save the damage, and if they don't have like a Price of Progress, I win the game on the next turn, because I have, onboard lethal after doing this. So anyways, guys, that was this game. Ochitai's Command definitely, kind of pulling some weight there. You kind of got to see a cool techie play where we fixed for a spell we could not cast by discarding it and then using Torrential Gearhulk to cast it through a Blood Moon. But pretty sick game, and kind of a testament to the deck's ability and power as a 3-color deck to fight through a Blood Moon. Alright guys, quick pause, and we'll be back for our next match in this league. Alrighty. And yeah, this hand's great. I don't know what I'm playing against when I'm playing against Throwing Shade here, but this hand looks fine. It's got removal, it's got a threat, it's got counterspell, it's got cantrip, it's got plenty of lands. It's lacking red mana, but it found red lands. I actually shuffled that, I believe, and found a Sacred Foundry, which is great. So I make an interesting line here. I actually don't play out the Sacred Foundry. I'm not going to burn the Deathrite Shaman off right away. What I kind of want to do is see if they have a fetch, and I also want to leave up Condescend because I would like to get value off Condescend, and it's possible I want to just go Sacred Foundry. I go ahead and just opt here. I do keep the Force of Will because that allows me to tap out and still get something relevant on their turn when I tap out or protect whatever I tap out for. They're at a significant amount of mana here, and they're just using Deathrite Shaman as a threat but not playing anything, which is kind of interesting to me, and leads me to believe that maybe I should have Foundry sooner. I just go ahead and fire off the Deathrite Shaman. They get me for 2 damage. It's cool, but it takes them off a mana on the next turn, so they're basically limited with a land drop to 5 mana as opposed to 6 with a land drop, which cuts them off of something like Primeval Titan, which my guess is they probably have more 6s or something, or they have more cards like a 6-drop in hand than they do, cards like Light of the Autumn, which I assume they top deck this turn, because they just haven't been playing little threats. I go ahead and Jace the Mind Sculptor, bounce their 4/3, which means Jace will survive against the Boreal Druid if they opt to attack the Jace with Boreal Druid. They do play their land down, and here they go for a Primal Command, and this is kind of where this line of play makes sense because I get to Force of Will them, and then I have a Mental Misstep up to counter whatever they may play off of their Bayou. I draw an Ancestral Vision, which I think is too slow right now. I don't think I have time to suspend that because I think I have to use my mana to one, play on a blocker, and also leave up counter magic here. So I get my blocker down. I have Absorb up. I don't think I know I don't, but I don't think it's actually worthwhile to absorb the Night of Autumn here. I don't have a great removal spell for it right now, But I think it's a mistake to waste Absorb on Knight of Autumn because there's a lot of cards like Eldritch Evolution or Natural Order that could just blow me out as a cast post Knight of Autumn. And they're both cards that they could likely have because I haven't really had a full tap-out turn when they had access to mana to actually cast either of those two spells. They find a Dryad Arbor so they can commit to killing my Jace. They attack with both. I go ahead and put the Soulfire Grandmaster in front of the Knight of Autumn. And yeah, I don't cast out Snappy there. What I opt to do here is cast out Snappy Caster, get the Firebolt back. I Firebolt both of the 1/1s. They go ahead and clone the Dryad Arbor with their Thespian Stage because it looks like they're committing to attacking the Jace to kill it because Jace is kind of just pulling ahead. But because I was able to find the Path to Exile, I'm able to make good blocks here and block the Dryad Arbor, the Thespian Stage cloning a Dryad Arbor. Path to Exile the 4/3 Knight of Autumn, giving them an additional land, but I think right now they're low on gas, not low on lands. I find, a Teferi, which, the combo of Jace Teferi is just pretty oppressive. With the untap from Teferi, I'm still able to leave up Absorb here, so unless I get Wastelanded or Strip Mined on their turn, I should be pretty safe to counter most things. They go ahead and tap out for a Primeval Titan, which is a card that actually we expected was kind of in their range on last turn. I go through some issues here of tapping for mana. Oh, correction, no, I'm condescending this. I'm condescending this because Condescend is a worse card the longer the game goes on against Hoof, and it gives me some incremental value. Whereas Absorb, I think, because it's a hard counter, is just going to get better and better with time. My hand is stacked now. I pretty much am in a place where I don't think I can lose the game now because I have Torrential Gearhulk and Monastery Mentor. I just go ahead and resolve and Consecrated Sphinx. I go ahead and resolve Sphinx because I'm going to get to untap 2 lands and actually leave up Absorb on their turn. They go ahead and upkeep Worldly Tutor and find Dromoka. I actually do figure that they're actually going to find Dromoka here, but I don't really care about Dromoka. I have Jace to answer an onboard Dromoka. I have Teferi to tuck an onboard Dromoka. And I have Torrential Gearhulk plus Path to Exile to answer Dragonlord Dromoka. So the card really isn't scaring me right now. I just go ahead and resolve it. I should have Jace before I fetched that land there. I don't think I did, but I'm just kind of playing quickly here because I want to get them to concede so we can go into game 2. I figure if I do this, they're just going to pack it in because they're on 0 cards, and there are not a lot of top decks, especially with an untap from Teferi, that are going to get them out of this. I don't think there's any, really, that get them out of this in the game of Magic. So I just want to show them the win as fast as I could because you can't reveal hand. Well, you could concede and reveal hand, but you can't reveal hand during game in Moto. So I wanted to be like, hey, let's just go to the next game, man. But the correct tactical play was to not fetch. It was to Teferi draw a card to increase options off of Jace pulls. Then use Jace, 0 ability to brainstorm. Get rid of the 2 worst cards. Fetch to make sure those 2 cards were not things that we were likely to draw in the following turn, and then cast Gearhulk. So sometimes you'll see me do stuff like that just to play quickly to get to the next game. But technically speaking, yes, you would have fetched before, or you would have fetched after activating Jace, which I don't even think I activated this turn. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back for game number 2 in this match. Alrighty, guys, back. Alright, this hand's acceptable. It's got a Ponder, and it's kind of like a hand I think we had in a similar hand that we had in a couple other games. The interesting thing about this hand is that we're on the draw, so I don't think I don't think it's correct to actually suspend Ancestral Visions in this matchup on turn 1, given the keep that I keep here. I do find, I believe, a Tundra. I just go for lands. I actually do keep this pile, even though it has a red card that I cannot cast right now, because I intend on impulsing on the following turn to find red land of some sort, or I'm hoping to. They have a pretty big threat on turn 2 with their Mana Dork and are able to get down a Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, which is going to be a tougher one to beat. They plus it here to start beating me down, which I don't know how much of a fan I am of, but it's not going to be bad here. I get down to Misty Rainforest. The cool thing about them, they minus the Nissa. The cool thing about them minusing the Nissa is now I can actually threaten it with Nimble Obstructionist or even Mind Sensor. They go ahead and plus it this turn. I let them attack. Cool by me. I am leaving up counter magic like Mana Drain here, specifically, to play around any like Natural Order or something, but when they go to the EOT, I just cast Nimble Obstructionist out, and I'm able to attack the Nissa, and despite being at 12, I'm in a pretty favorable position here, because they don't have access to a whole ton of mana, and I do have pretty good permission, despite being very mana lean with this draw. I do go ahead and cycle Miscalc, trying to look for land, find, multiple lands off my draw step and off of that cycle. I play the tap land because there's not really much relevance post-Wasteland, unless they're running Strip Mine as well, to casting out or playing out the untapped land. I go ahead and Mana Drain the 6-drop Chord of Calling, or the 6-mana Chord of Calling. I block their mana dork there. I think it's a very worthwhile trade. I'm not really ahead on the tempo race here, but being able to take them down an additional land drop is pretty powerful, and I have a good follow-up threat in the form of Monastery Mentor, which I'm able to cast and also resolve a dig through time on my turn to get a monk token, and also get after the next two most relevant cards. I believe I just take a Searing Spear and a land here because I want to make my land drops. I then resolve on my turn because I have mana advantage from Mana Drain right now, and even Mind Sensor, which I would not be able to cast on their turn. They play on a Utopia Sprawl, which is going to give them access to Gavany Township with one additional land drop, but and Moto is misremembering itself. It doesn't really matter. They do concede here because they know they're had. I believe I just cast the Swords to. I believe what happens here actually is they cast their own Even Mind Sensor on my turn in response to me fetching with this fetch land, which it's not showing that I played, but I did play. In response to them playing on Even Mind Sensor off of the Utopia Sprawled Forest and Gavany Township, I Swords to Plowshares the Even Mind Sensor, find my land off of Windswept Heath, and then I believe just pass the turn, leaving up Cryptic Command with 3 monk tokens in play. Or 2 monk tokens in play and a Monastery Mentor, and the possibility of Cryptic Command to get another monk token and also get a card deeper in my deck, or just tap their team so I can get in for a pretty big attack. That all said, the game doesn't go another turn because when they see I have an answer to Even Mind Sensor and I have bazillion open mana and they're on a pretty tight or tenuous mana situation, they just go ahead and pack it in. All right, guys, quick pause and we'll come back for the next game in this league. Alrighty, guys, back. This hand's not keepable. It doesn't have a cantrip. It has too many mana inefficient cards. This hand's a lot better. It's a little awkward because it has Ancestral Vision. When I see Gitaxian Probe and Marsh Flats, I think in general control. I do play out the Celestial Colonnade first. The one frailty of this hand is it cannot get Ancestral Vision down on turn 1. I see a Time Vault on turn 2, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't spooked out. I could leave up Daze on their turn, but Daze is not going to stop a lot of cards that actually interact with Time Vault. And I think it's better just to go for the highest upside play, which is that they don't have a card to combo with Time Vault yet, and I'm able to buy on their turn. I do draw into Ancestral Recall, but I think it's too dangerous to actually tap out for it on my turn. I don't tap out for it on their turn either because they have a Galvanic Key. I want to try to get them to fight me, so when they goes to end step here, they cast out the Galvanic Key. I Ancestral myself. I go ahead and remand the Galvanic Key. They go ahead and attempt to re-resolve the Galvanic Key. I Daze the Galvanic Key, which is great for me. Like, this is like exactly kind of what I wanted to set up. But unfortunately, they have another relevant threat on the next turn, which is Jace the Mind Sculptor. They plus Jace the Mind Sculptor, targeting myself, or targeting me. I can burn the Jace off relatively soon. I opt to leave up Oshitai's Command to get something along the lines of like Voltaic Servant. That's another card that combos well with Time Vault. They go ahead, and they drew into the key. Like, so they told me they just drew into the key naturally. So I just Oshitai's Command here. I'm actually Oshitai's Commanding to gain 4 life and draw a card to see if I can find specifically Mental Misstep or Force of Will. But they have Counter Squall to stop just even this. I think I would have allowed this to resolve, though, if I were them. So I go ahead and lose here to a pretty strong draw off of a cool blue-black Time Vault deck. I'll be back momentarily, guys, for game number 2 in this match. Alrighty, folks, back. Yeah, hands acceptable. So, actually, I'll say this about this hand. I think this hand is the most suspicious hand that I keep over the course of this entire tournament. That said, I think if we went results-oriented, I would not want to keep this hand based on the first game we played against this blue-black deck, but I think on the average, on the median draws, their deck's going to be a lot slower to win. I don't think it's going to generally combo out that quickly. I think in general it's going to want to exchange cards for time and just get more draw steps. It's going to be more controlling. And I think my list is going to have to generally play the aggressive or the beatdown role in this matchup, despite what happened in the first game. So this hand, despite not being good, I don't think this hand's great, but I think it's okay in the matchup because I think it's an aggro control versus control matchup where I'm the aggro control and they're the control. I keep this hand because I'm on the play and I have a turn 2 threat that I can play, and if I draw in any blue card, I can protect it with Force of Will. Flame Slash is pretty much dead, but it's also good to make land drops and control mirrors. So I keep this hand, even though I think it is probably the worst hand that I keep in this entire tournament, and I think it was very debatable. I draw to a land here, so not rewarded whatsoever. And you'll see over the course of this game, I do get a little punished for my greed in this keep. But I do think it was defensible. So get PZ down. PZ does resolve, so I have the threat. They have to find an answer to my threat. And this is kind of what I want to do. I want to put the ball in their court to make difficult decisions on whether they use their cantrips and their card selection to find answers, or whether they use their card selection and tutors to find threats, i.e. try to win with them.
So I have Brainstorm. I say Brainstorm to basically use as Force of Will fodder, but when I draw into a fetch, I pop the Brainstorm off. Unfortunately, I get very unlucky and hit exactly 3 lands off of Brainstorm, which are pretty much the exact 3 cards that I did not want to hit. So I'm still very flooded. They look at my hand with Vendilion Click and just probably laugh to themselves and say, all right, buddy, good on you. You got that hand. I've got a Force of Will, which I suppose by next turn I can hard cast, but I do have an Elemental token in play, so I still do technically have the onboard advantage over them. They've been, can-tripping a bunch, though, and they have an onboard Sensei's Dividing Top, so I assume that I'm probably losing this game. I draw another land off the top here, so this is probably one of my most unlucky, one of my greediest keeps, coupled with one of my most unlucky sets of draw steps over the course of the tournament. So I assume that I'm probably losing this game. When I'm at this point, I'm like, I'm probably got to be 90% to lose. They go ahead and get rid of the Force of Will, go ahead and resolve a Jace the Mind Sculptor, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm just completely out of this game now, right? Well, not always. So we did get a little unlucky. Now we get a little lucky. I blow up a land, blow up the Ancient Tomb specifically because I want to fight them on mana advantage. Because the one thing that my hand does have over their hand is that right now I have mana advantage, right? That's about all I have. I have mana advantage, and that's it. I got very lucky and hit War Leader's Helix, so I blew up the Jace. Was able to do exactly 5 to it. So I've dealt with their threat, and they're back into the department of, hey, you have to technically answer this elemental token at some point in time. You have to find a way to win, and you have to stop any relevant, aggressive cards that I may play. So I'm still off the top of my deck, but I was able to deal with their most relevant threat, and I think blowing up Ancient Tomb is correct, because the game is not likely going fast enough for me to actually utilize the damage off of that is a resource that matters, and I want them to be down 2 mana. I want them to tap lower on their turn is basically what I'm getting after. They cast a Latinum's Legacy, which is good for me, because it means that their mana is not going to be up on my turn, and if I draw something relevant, I could possibly resolve it on this next turn. And I do. I draw a Snapcaster Mage, which is not something that I'm going to cast right now. Because their deck has a very powerful combo in the form of Time Vault, I want to leave Snapcaster available to possibly brainstorm on their turn if I need to find a counterspell right away. However, I am going to cast this Ponder, and I'm glad to have saved the fetch. I'm able to fetch here and get rid of 2 worthless land cards and keep the Jace the Mind Sculptor off of my Ponder. Ponder and a fetch, always nice. And as you'll see, kind of like the last man standing, the Elemental here is just clocking away. He's just chipping away, 1 turn at a time. They play on a Search for Iskanta, which I am certainly not going to try to fight. I go ahead and EOT the Snapcaster Mage. They look with top. And what I'm doing here is they cast Pact of Negation. So what I was going to get back is War Leader's Helix. I was going to straight up force them to counter the cards that I don't care about as much because I really want Jace to resolve here. So I get Nibble Obstructionist, Condescend, and Daze. Nibble Obstructionist is great because it can actually buy me a whole turn cycle if they do end up getting the TV combo. And it can also just be played as a threat, which can end the game quicker. So I cast Condescend on Galvanic Key. I figure the less pieces of this combo they have, the better. They do have a Buried Ruin in play, which means they can get it back, but they're going to be tapping out for or tapping very, very low off Pact of Negation, or for Pact of Negation this turn. So I don't think it's likely they're going to do that. And it also means that if they do find the TV, they have to use more resources to get back the other operative piece in Galvanic Key. I'm very happy to find Counterflux, but again, I do have to have worries about Academy Runes and Buried Rune here, getting back pieces that I counter. So I keep the Abrade and keep the Counterflux, keep the Nimble Obstructionist. I just go ahead and resolve Nimble Obstructionist on my turn to force them to have another removal spell to deal with it, because this puts them on a 2-turn clock, right? So they have 2 more turns left to either enact their combination or answer my board and deal with a Jace. So I don't feel bad in this position, but Top and Escanta the Sunken Ruin are both pretty spooky. They have a Go for the Throat, which is fine. I can accept that. I basically just keep all of my spells at this point. I play out a JVP because it'd be nice to be able to get War Leader's Helix back and force them to counter that, as opposed to doing something that's board impacting and, still chipping away with this elemental token and very, very slowly getting there. They find a Logic Knot, which is fine. It's a counter spell, but I can fight that. I have Counterflux to get the most relevant stuff. I have a Braid and Mana Leak. A Braid to deal with a Time Vault 1 time, and then Mana Leak to possibly stop something that's like the 3rd or 4th spell cast in a turn. If we get into a big stack battle. They go ahead and draw with Top here. Use Escanta the Sunken Ruin. Evidently, they want to get rid of the 3 cards they saw with Top. They brainstorm back into their... correction. They brainstorm post Escanta. They drew the Top with the Escanta the Sunken Ruin. So basically, they did a lot of powerful kind of nothing there. Basically got rid of the bad cards they likely had on top of their deck. I flip a Jace this turn. Should have played my land second. That was an error on my part. Although I don't think I would have kept Caracas. I probably would have kept the the Steam Vents. I cast War Leader's Helix. This ends up eating a Logic Knot, but it's fine because it's kind of a free card anyways. I'm just using Jace Telepith Unbound to get it. I do Mana Leak this because I think it's worth fighting over because it ups the clock by so much. They do have an answer to it in the form of Spell Snare, and I'm not going to counterflux that because they have a lot of live draws, and there are certain cards that I just need to counter. There are some threats that just win the game on the spot here, and I really need to have access to counterflux, I think, to get them. Speaking of one, we have Tezzeret the Seeker. I instantly counterflux this because outside so right now if it was Time Vault specifically, I think I'd probably still lose because of Academy Rune's interaction with Sensei's Divoting Top. It's very mana inefficient for my opponent, but I think they'd get me. But Tezzeret is a perfect thing to counterflux because Tezzeret is going to find the Time Vault, and I don't want Time Vault to even be in the graveyard because of Buried Rune and Academy Runes here. So countering Tezzeret basically just puts them back so much they just go ahead and pack it in. I think when I was talking to them after the game, they said they had Flusterstorm on top of their deck, but Counterflux doesn't give a crap about any other counters. It just does its thing. I guess technically you could exile it, so you could use Overwhelming Denial and or something along the lines of I was thinking, can't remember now. Mind Break Trap, because they both exile as opposed to counter. That said, we go into Game 3. I'm not going to actually cover Game 3 here because my opponent's really far behind on time resources. In Game 3, what ends up happening is they keep a little bit more of a mana-constrained hand, and I have a more mana-rich hand that also includes a Wasteland. I Wasteland them off a color, which puts them back far enough that they're the first control player to miss a land drop, and they know with the time that they have left, they're just not going to win. They could have possibly won that game, but it would have required a lot more luck, and I think I got an onboard threat plus Wasteland and kept them trapped on 3 lands while I was up to 5 lands, which, in the early to mid-game, that's kind of where control games can run out of hand, because once you get up on two mana sources over your other control opponent, you can both play relevant cards and also play counter spells, which just allows you to win on mana advantage in the early to mid-game. Alright guys, quick pause. We'll go to the next match. Like I said, I'm not going to cover the next game because the next game is a pretty early concession, and it's not really all that cool. Alright guys, back. Hand's fine. It needs a red source to get a Young Pyromancer down, but it has a Gataxian Probe to combo out kind of with the Young Pyromancer. It has an opt to EOT, look for a fetch land to find red mana. Find the fetch land. Get a little lucky there. But I think this is still a solid keep even without red mana. Draw into the red mana regardless. Actually play out the red mana because the value of the fetch goes up as the game goes on over any other sort of land that we may find. I go ahead and look at their hand, and quick pause while we kind of go over their hand. They're obviously on an Esper control deck, but the one upside that my hand has is that they have a reactive card in the form of Memory Lapse, and then they have 2 white cards that, given their keep, they cannot actually cast. The one thing that's interesting is that they flooded Stranded for a non-white land here, and I think that definitely punished them in this game because they end up getting trapped on white mana, which is a big game because I have an early threat to play against them here. They play their second land and they're leaving up Memory Lapse, which I'm fine with. Memory Lapse doesn't really scare me that much, and at some point I can actually fight it with my Spell Snare. And I just start doing lightning bolt damage every turn. I think that's fine. And looking at what their hand consists of, I assume that in this matchup I'm going to generally be the beatdown deck, and they're going to be the control deck. I'm going to play my deck as more of a beatdown deck against them. Under, I think, a fairly safe assumption. I just have more cards that are irrelevant if I'm trying to play long-term control, like i.e. Burn. I don't really like Burn in long-term control plans. I continue to get my lightning bolt damage in here. What I opt to do is actually go to their upkeep, so I can fight them on mana efficiency here. And I go ahead and just throw a War Leader's Helix, which is, I think, very close to lethal on the following turn. They cast a Mana Leak on their upkeep, of all things. I cast Spell Snare. They Memory Lapse it, but now they're tapped down on their turn, and I still have pretty overwhelming advantage with Young Pyromancer. And I'm able to resolve hardcast a Consecrated Sphinx. I get punished this way by casting this out if they have like a Damnation or something, but I think the chances of them drawing out of this are pretty low at this point, and they agree. They see their next draw step after I've got 2 free cards off the Consecrated Sphinx, and they just go ahead and pack it in. At this point, popping a Wrath of God effect, a Damnation effect on Sphinx and Young Pyromancer would really just be, it looks like a 2-for-1, but it's really like, it's almost a 2-for-3. Oh, I'm sorry, a 3-for-2 in my advantage, because I already drew 2 cards off of the Consecrated Sphinx. Not to mention, I'm going to get a lot of mana advantage off of that, because they're going to be tapped on again. I can Wasteland them and or resolve, or not resolve, but play out a Celestial Colonnade plus JVP and leave up Snare. this game kind of just goes out of control for them. And I think a lot of it does tie back to the Flooded Strand play. I think if they had found white mana there, they would have been in a lot better spot because they still had Sunken Runes to fix for double black or double blue. And having that one white mana really would have made a world of difference because they could have played this game a lot more. I think they could have slow played the game a lot more, leaving up the memory lapse to kind of get into more mana, to get my bigger threats. But Pyromancer just kind of getting to run amok is just a thing that tends to end a lot of blue matchups, blue mirror matches. It really allows me to assume that good aggro control role that I think I want to play against them. All right, guys, quick pause. We'll go to the next game. Alrighty, so game 2. This one's actually a little more interesting a game. So I keep this hand. This hand's fine. It's got a tapped land, but it has an opt to kind of fix. I'm not going to try to opt on turn 1. I just want to get my tapped land out because I am going to want to have... I think in general, I'm not going to have draws that are as aggressive as my first draw against them to really get them in the early game. So I think in general, I'm going to have to fight on mana advantage, on the front of mana advantage. So I play out my irrigated farmland there to kind of just start getting ahead on mana advantage. Because they're playing 3-color, I assume they're probably not playing back to basics, so I think I can pretty much just go for whatever lands I want. And my hand's developing well. I find a Logic Knot, which is a great card to keep. I definitely want counter spells in this matchup. I actually don't mind 1 Lightning Bolt, 1 STP in hand because it allows me to actually deal with the Creeping Tar Pit as well. I get very lucky here and find my next land. I was really hoping to find a land here because this allows me to play on a Restoration Angel on their end step. And it's like a 50-50 shot if they want to counter the Restoration Angel, because there's a very good chance if they do counter the Restoration Angel that they're tapped low enough that I can possibly resolve a Planeswalker on the next turn, looking at it from their perspective. Now, I don't have a Planeswalker, but I still think it makes sense to throw the Resto down because it puts them in a tough spot. I don't have my next land drop, so I'm very happy when I see that their removal spell is Path to Exile, because it actually allows me to get up on mana advantage. I actually would rather, honestly, have the island than the Restoration Angel. The resto is just fine because it allows me to actually get a threat down. I played Direfleet Daredevil here. I don't want to go to discards here. They try to Cryptic Command this. I probably would have allowed any counterspell to resolve here outside of something like a Cryptic Command because I really don't want to give them card advantage. So I just go for a Logic Knot, a Cryptic Command here because I could disallow it, but then I'm not going to be able to cast their Ponder. I cast Ponder, get a free card out of it. I think I just take the island here to, again, make my land drops and just continue to get up on mana advantage and card advantage. We get Inquisition here. I believe they take my threat, which is telling about their hand. It means that they want to try to play, and they also Toxic Deluge. So they really just don't want to get aggro controlled out, and they think they can win the long game is what they're kind of telling me. But it also means their hand's more reactive and probably a little bit lighter on threats. They go ahead and preordain here. I'm not going to fight that. I believe I just tithe. No, I don't tithe yet. I get a Dig Through Time, which is nice. I'm kind of hoping to get some value off tithe, but if they don't play a land on the next turn, I'll probably just tithe anyways. Yeah, we tithe here for 1 land. I don't think it's worth waiting on it, and I also want to build up my graveyard size to make Dig Through Time a little bit cheaper. I have pretty much all replaceable cards in my graveyard. I don't have an Ancestral Recall in there I don't want to get rid of. They Brainstorm here. If they're playing like I'm playing, they're probably looking for Counter Magic and lands. Like, those are probably the best cards, and they probably at some point need to find 1 threat, because they do need to close the game out. At some point they need to, which means they're going to have to tap out at a given point in time. And the way they played this, they've taken away they've discarded my threats and killed all of my threats. So they really just want to play to the long game, which I'm fine with. I love playing the long game. I just disallow this because what it's going to take is probably my Dig Through Time, and I'd rather lose disallow to Thoughtseize than my Dig Through Time. I actually don't cast Dig Through Time there. I'm slow playing it because I figure that when they're not attacking and when they're on this many cards, they're not playing threats. They have a ton of counter magic is what my thinking is, and I really want Dig Through Time to resolve. So because I'm going to be discarding on the next turn, I go ahead and Dig Through Time in their upkeep here to cause a fight. They go ahead and cast Torrential Gearhulk, and I figure I can probably win this fight. As it turns out, I actually don't. So I cast Mana Leak, they Force of Will. I'm like, okay, well, Force of Will sucks. I end up casting Condescend on the Force of Will for 3. And the very last card in their hand is Mindbreak Trap. The cool thing is even though they're going to get a Torrential Gearhulk back, all they get to do is Brainstorm here, which really isn't that great. They find a land and have a draw into some card that I don't know about. I play out the fetch land, don't fetch it yet, just Swords of Plowshares this thing, and now I have a counter spell and I have 2 burn spells. But otherwise, despite them winning that counter fight against my Dig Through Time, I don't feel bad about this game. I feel like I have a lot of live draws. Now, I start kind of dead drawing here into more burn. I guess technically I do have 9 points of burn damage in hand, but burn's not really that great in this matchup outside of holding back stuff like man lands and maybe double burning a Planeswalker. That all said, I am up on cards, and, I now have 12 damage in burn. And I also have a counter spell. If I'm Baral, I'm happy enough to just play Baral out, because if I do have to absorb, I would love to be able to loot away some of these burn spells to turn them into relevant threats and or counter spells. So I get Collective Brutality here. I just go ahead and absorb this. I believe that they memory lapse my absorb. Collective Brutality me, taking away my Lightning Helix. They cast a Council's Judgment and just get rid of my Baral. They evidently don't want me looting either. Which, it's fine. I mean, I sucked down a pretty premium removal spell that can deal with a Planeswalker in exchange for Baral, which I think I'm happy with. They attack with the Creeping Tar Pit. I just cast my least efficient burn spell, Searing Spear, to kill it, taking away their threat. I draw to Negate, which is great. Negate is very, very strong in this matchup because most of their threats are not going to be creatures. They're going to be spells. And there you go, Leon the Last Hope. Now, one thing that's interesting here is Absorb is a more flexible counter spell. It's less efficient than Negate, but I assume that Negate counters like about 90% of the relevant cards that I want to counter in their deck. So I actually opt not to show it because they know that I have Absorb. So I'm playing for the small incremental equity and or advantage and hidden information there. They cast a Damnation. I go ahead and cast the Negate here just because I kind of want to close the game out, before forever. But they also have Pact of Negation now, so they have a lot of free counter spells in their deck. From talking to them, I think they also have Flusterstorm. I do sack the fetch land in hand. I did play out my previous fetch land, but I did not want to play out my island there because if I draw Jace the Mind Sculptor or Brainstorm, I want to be able to get rid of it with the fetch land that I have in play. And it's also, again, valuable hidden information. Now, I think I make a misplay here. I like casting out Soulfire Grandmaster, but I think I should have played my land here. If not on this turn, on the next turn, because it actually allows me to double spell. Soulfire Grandmaster is actually pretty good here. And one of the things you'll see me do is, I'm like, all right, well, I guess I can just use this thing's, ability, which, they Nimble Obstructionist here, which is fine. I'm not going to be able to cast the Lightning Bolt. And I'm not going to just pitch Lightning Bolt out. I want to force them to use good counter magic on my bad cards. So like I was saying, I kind of look at Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning as being kind of bad cards in this matchup. But when you have Soulfire Grandmaster, they become Hammer of Bogarden, which is really good in a control mirror, right? Because, you have to, you have to counter it, and it's not really a card that's that highly relevant. It will kill you. So I cast a Bolt here, get a Bolt back. This is where I should have played my land down because I could have double bolted. I go ahead to attack because I know this is going to be the last attack step I can get with the Soulfire Grandmaster and due to Celestial Colonnade being on the board. They cast an Opt here. I believe they just find a land after bottoming. I go ahead and double bolt, or attempt to double bolt here. Get the first bolt off, I believe. And just throw a bolt at face, putting them down to 10. Go ahead and fetch here. I believe finding a Volk. Nope, Plateau. Go ahead and reactivate the Soulfire Grandmaster, cast the Lightning Bolt again, and you get a little unfortunate here, and I hit Spell Pierce, but, honestly, Lightning Bolt is not good in this matchup, so I'm happy just getting cards out of their hand, and I still have Chain Lightning, so, it's not like they really stop this permanently. I just go ahead and Chain Lightning their face, and you'll note my life total is, ridiculously high. Not that life total really matters that much in this matchup, but, this plan's actually kind of working. I'm casting these bad spells, and they have to counterspell this. They used a counterspell on Chain Lightning in this matchup, which just feels epic level good. But the party kind of stops here. I'm out of threats. I can't attack with Soulfire Grandmaster into Celestial Colonnade, and they finally hit a Gideon. So I do need to hit a draw step here. I hit a Vidillion Click, which I'm happy to cast during my main one. I just go ahead and cast it out main one, targeting myself because I don't want Flame Slash in my hand. I'm able to get rid of Flame Slash, find Jace the Mind Sculptor, draw with Jace the Mind Sculptor, find Cryptic Command, and put a Factor Fiction back on top. The plan here is that I'm probably going to Cryptic Command to buy tempo advantage so I can attack them to death with my flyer. So they go to attack the Jace. I don't really care if Jace is at 1. There's not burn in their deck, so they're not going to burn the Jace out from here. I highly doubt there's Pump. They dig through time. What I end up doing here is I Cryptic Command the dig through time, bouncing the Celestial Colonnade so I can get 3 damage through in the air because Celestial Colonnade has to come back into play tapped. I draw for the turn, find Torrential Gearhulk, which is going to probably reuse the Cryptic Command to tap their team and bounce their land, so that I can attack for lethal with the Torrential Gearhulk, Soulfire Grandmaster, and Vidillion Clique on the following turn. This gets blown out if they have a counterspell of some variety, but I've kind of done a good job, I think, of forcing them to use good spells like Counterspell against pretty medium cards like Chain Lightning in the matchup. They evidently don't have it. I bounce their land, tap their team, and I've got lethal on board and I'm able to get through. So this game was really interesting. It kind of showcased the value of Soulfire Grandmaster in a really sweet way. where, I kind of think I undervalue Soulfire Grandmaster in these control matchups, but its ability to essentially be Hammer of Bogarten here, which if you're familiar with that card, guys, is a really old card. It was kind of one of the first recursive, burn spells. So, basically, Hammer of Bogarten, 2 red and a white, sorcery speed, deal 3 damage to any target. Activated ability, 3 red, 2. Activate this ability only during your upkeep. Return Hammer of Bogarten to your hand is the card I'm talking about. It's actually less mana efficient than Lightning Bolt, Soulfire Grandmaster. But in this control matchup, Soulfire was really kind of awesome. I didn't think of this application in control matchups, but the fact that I got them to use good counter magic on cards that I think are garbage in this matchup, but they have to be countered because they just end the game eventually because I'm just getting so much value off of them, was really awesome. And I think it kind of showcased an awesome facet of the deck that I'd really never considered before. And after I'm not saying this situation always comes up, but I didn't really give this card its due in this matchup. I thought of this card as just kind of a card you play out against red deck wins or aggressive decks, and then just burn out some of their creatures and it helps you race, which I think is probably what it is in the median draw. But in the kind of outside case where it's one of the last threats standing in a control matchup, it's actually also not bad because it makes bad cards kind of good against them. It forces them to use their good cards against your bad cards because of the value it can accrue. All right, guys, quick pause. We'll get to the last game that I have for you in this league that we played out. Alright guys, back, and we get to play against Nathan Hogman here. Hand's fine. I think I know what Nathan's... I think at the time I knew he was on a blue-white tempo kind of deck, or an blue-white Stoneblade. I play out my Bloodstained Mire here. I don't think he's on a Strip Mine spread, but I just want to conceal information if he doesn't know what I'm on. Plays on a JVP. I'm pretty hasty just to burn this thing off. I just get it real fast, because I don't really want to give him the value of a loot effect on it. Plays out a non-basic Tundra. And here, I kind of just want to chill out, and I think my deck is more controlling than his deck is. I think he runs more creatures than I do, and I'm probably going to be the control deck as opposed to the aggro control deck in this matchup. So I just hang out. I'm going to Impulse here. I get pretty punished here, though. I go ahead and find a Mystic Confluence, which is going to give me a lot of value in a long control game. My opponent resolves Factor Fiction, which, I actually did think of this card, and I was the worst card that could happen to me is Factor Fiction here. And if it does, I get kind of had. If it doesn't, I like impulsing there. I don't think you just leave up Mana Leak randomly on their end step. I think that's just playing too timidly. To play around 1 to 2 cards that really punish you for tapping out of Mana Leak. I do really like his play of playing Factor Fiction there. In regards to Brightling, I go ahead and counter it. So my estimation of their hand is this. I think his hand probably consists of 1 to 2 4-mana threats that he's been very loath to play into open blue mana. Justifiably so, because I have a lot of counter spells. So I think his hand is a little bit clunky, but has some very good threats. I think it has very good 4-mana threats that are just a little bit clunky because of their inefficiency. He goes ahead and casts Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants. I don't cast Mystic Confluence here because I safely, I think, assume that he is on some number of counter spells. I test the waters for counter magic here by getting a Snapcaster Mage and casting a Braid on Jace Vryn's Prodigy. He evidently really wants the Jace Vryn's Prodigy to happen, so he allows the Snapcaster to resolve but counters the Braid, which leads me to believe that he probably only had a conditional counter spell in hand because he probably would have just gotten the Snapcaster. Now he values Jace Vryn's Prodigy over Johnny, Adversary of Tyrants, is able to flip the Jace here, which kind of stinks, but I can beat this. Ends up casting out one of the 4-mana Planeswalkers that we kind of assumed he had in hand, or 4-mana threats. I mana drain it so I can get mana advantage on the following turn, and then he has back to base, which is a Savage Beating if it's allowed to resolve, even though it does get 2 of his lands. I go ahead and condescend this and keep Disallow, and I believe bottom the Plains, but I may have misclicked and actually top the Plains in this game. I forget. I go ahead and get the mana off of this. The reason that I keep Disallow is because I still have a good onboard threat to threaten Jace here. If I didn't have a good onboard threat, or a card in hand to play to threaten Jace here, I would have probably bottomed Disallow. But I'm able to get Direfleet Daredevil down, and with the mana off of Mana Drain, which is a huge time tempo beating, I'm able to cast for pretty much free a Factor Fiction out of my opponent's graveyard, which puts me up a lot on cards here. He has a Gideon the Trials, which I just go ahead and Disallow here, expecting that I'm probably going to fight. He has a Misdirection, which is good. It means he can basically counter my Disallow. Basically retarget Disallow to target the Misdirection here, is what he does. He cycles Nimble Obstructionist to kind of, as a tempo play to keep me off of Dig Through Timing right now. I get very lucky here, though. I mean, my plan had been probably to just dig through time on my turn to find an answer to one of these 2 cards. But I get lucky and draw to Teferi, and I'm able to tuck the Gideon. Gideon is now completely gone. We don't know where he's at in the deck because my opponent gets lucky. He draws a Stoneforge Mystic and finds a Sophie, which shuffles their deck. Stoneforge Mystic was pretty savage there. I kind of put them on 2 4-mana Planeswalkers and probably just some lands. I didn't put them on counter magic at that point, possibly removal. But likely not. But Stoneforge is a pretty savage draw because Sword of Fire and Ice is really tough for my deck to deal with, and the fact that I've exiled my own Abrade at this point is going to make it so that the only way I can really deal with it is through a tuck effect like Teferi, which Teferi is likely to die, or a bounce effect. Like Cryptic Command. And actually, guys, I'm going to go on a quick pause and restart this game. Unfortunately, Moto's misremembering how this game played out. We do dig through time, and actually I do believe I find Electrolyze, I find Nibble Obstructionist, but I don't just cycle it targeting Jace Telepith Unbound. I definitely cycle it to stifle sort of Fire and Ice trigger that targets Teferi. So let me jump back and try to get back to this point in the game and see if we can get Moto to work the replay. Alright guys, back with this game. Moto is re-remembering the sequence of plays as it occurred. So, oh wait, no, it's not. Oh gosh, guys. Well, it's really unfortunate because this game's actually really sweet. I'm going to go on another pause and see if I can get it to remember the play sequence correctly. So what ends up happening here is we end up getting Nibble Obstructionist and Electrolyze off of Dig Through Time. We have an untap with Teferi because we drew with Teferi this turn, finding Jace the Mind Sculptor and playing our Irrigated Farmland. What we end up doing is electrolyzing the Jace on our turn, well, they're tapped out. Get the untap to leave up the Nibble Obstructionist. When they attack with Stoneforge Mystic at face, because they want to get value off of the 2 damage from Sword of Fire and Ice to kill the Teferi, I use my Nibble Obstructionist to stifle the sword trigger, and then force them essentially to attack with the Stoneforge at the Teferi on the following turn, allowing me to resolve Jace to hopefully find a threat that can race the Sword of Fire and Ice, because that's pretty much what I'm going to have to do unless I find a Cryptic Command. Anyways, quick pause again, guys. I'm going to see if I can get this replay to work. I think this is a challenging one for Moto, but I have gotten it to work once before, so I'll be right back momentarily and see if I can get it to run. Well, unfortunately, guys, Moto cannot remember this game to save its life, and it's unfortunate because the game is pretty cool. So what ends up happening is we don't have a Nibble Obstructions in our graveyard at this point in time. We have an Electrolyze in there, and my opponent has 1 less Jace Telepith Unbound in play. And what happens is when they attack my face with Stoneforge Mystic and put the Sophie trigger on the stack, I stifle it with Nibble Obstructionist, which is an uncounterable way of stifling it, which also leaves my Teferi left alive and keeps them off of a pretty vital, probably a vital draw step. It also allows me to uptick Teferi on the following turn to get a card deeper in my deck, and also pretty much put a forced attack on the Stoneforge Mystic to hit Teferi in the face directly as opposed to attacking me, which means they're not going to get to draw a card off of Sophie on the following turn as well. That allows me to resolve a Jace the Mind Sculptor and find an Inferno Titan. With the Teferi untap, I'm able to get down both threats, and I'm able to put them in a place where they still have to attack with their protected card with the Sword of Fire and Ice on it. Well, I can get a lethal attack in on the following turn with Inferno Titan, which is kind of how this game ends. It's unfortunate that I can't rewatch it in these replays, but I've tried, unfortunately, a couple times to get Moto to re-remember the plays by clicking through phases and also just allowing it to replay from the beginning again, and I just can't get it to work. So I'm going to go on to Game 2 in this match against Nathan Hogman here, but we managed to get him in Game 1 in a pretty cool and tight game. Sort of the Stoneforge Mystic and Sword of Fire and Ice definitely brought an interesting element to the game, because with Abrade gone, Sophie is a real big problem that you don't want to allow to resolve. So, that said, made for a pretty interesting game, and we got to see some really cool applications of Nibble Obstructionist, both from Nathan to essentially put me back on tempo from casting Dig Through Time, and then from me using the Nibble Obstructionist to stifle a Sophie trigger to keep my opponent Nathan off of a card, and also keep my Teferi alive for a follow-on turn, which bought me the added tempo advantage of forcing their Stoneforge Mystic into an attack on the following turn with Sword of Fire and Ice equipped to it to kill Teferi, while keeping them again off of a card. So Nibble Obstructionist did work on both sides of the board for both players, and it was a very, very interesting, very grindy game that I think, due to me getting an Inferno Titan on the next couple draw steps off of Teferi and Jace, allowed me to lock up the game, because Inferno Titan is a card that can actually literally raise Sword of Fire and Ice. Anyways, guys, I'm going to go on a pause, and we'll go into the next game in this match set, and we'll check it out. Be back momentarily. Alright guys, back for the final game that I'm going to show in this league that we played. So this hand is unkeepable. It only has 1 land, it has no cantrips. See a Wasteland on top. I actually bottom Wasteland because I'm looking for a red mana source here. I draw into a Teferi. I play out my tapped land because I assume I'm the control in this matchup, but I do want to develop my mana situation. They have a Chrome Mox, which is spooky, because if they have another land drop, they go like Geist of St. Traft on turn 1, and I'll probably just lose the game. I'm very lucky, though, and it appears they kept a more mana-tight hand. They did have to mulligan to 6, which is unfortunate, and they don't get there with their land drop off of the draw step. That said, it's tough on Moto because you don't get value mulligans, double 6s, or 2 6s and 2 5s, so you have to keep some hands that are a little bit more suspicious. That's again kind of an ode, or another reason to play more Xerox style decks. Is that over time you get a little more control over variance, so screwing or flooding, based on early mulligan decisions, doesn't tend to hit you as badly. I have 2 basic lands, which means that I can have a little bit of game to play around back to basics. I also have Restoration Angel, which on my opponent on a mana tight hand, like they're on, it seems to be pretty good here because I'm going to throw it out there. If they answer it, cool. If they don't, just as good because it is going to eventually kill them. And getting the onboard advantage, so it's kind of a weird game from the standpoint that because they're a little bit mana screwed, I actually opt to play the matchup differently than I think my going in perspective is on the matchup. I think in general I'm going to want to play control, but because I have the ability to jump into an aggro control role, I think it makes sense to jump onto the beatdown plan here because it's going to limit their time to draw out of the initial mana screw they're in. I go ahead and counter the Vendilion Click, and I fully assume that they're probably going to have multiple business spells on their following turn if they're playing this EOT, because they want to get me to tap out. They do have Back to Basics, and I am able to negate it, but they have Spell Snare as well, which means that now we're locked out of 2 of our mana sources. The downside for my poor opponent is, or for Nathan here, is that I have Teferi in hand, and because I cast the Mana Drain on my turn, I'm able to get Teferi down under the Back to Basics lock, which means that I'm going to start untapping my non-basic lands, which means that they basically Stone Rain themselves, and I have fairly unfettered access to most of my mana. I start tapping to cast Remand or Disallow on this card, even though I could Chain Lightning it on my turn, which is probably the higher value play. Because I've kind of gone for the beatdown roll, and I sense that I smell blood in the water, I'm going to actually save Chain Lightning, because Chain Lightning actually ups the clock by a full turn on them. So I'd actually rather save it to throw it at their face and just disallow or remand this card. I think that makes the most sense because I just want to limit their draw steps. The more lands they get, the better off they're going to be. Now that they're back a land drop at a car waste off of Back to Basics, I think it just puts me in a pretty advantageous position. So we get a little lucky in this last game. Nathan's a really great player, but I think he got a little bit mana screwed in this last game. The first game was very, very interactive and long, and you got to see a lot of cool things kind of happen. Unfortunately, the replay broke, but it was a fairly convoluted and complex game. So I can understand how that would happen, especially with all the cycling cards and the tutor effects that we both used. But this game, unfortunately just came down to, mana issues, and we were able to kind of get them from the mana issues, and we had, relevant follow-up to our mana drain that allowed us to get the Teferi down, untap our non-basics, and also leave up counter magic on their following turn, which, with the onboard threat and the card engine, is going to tend to spell the end of the game. Anyways, guys, this is the end of the league gameplay that I have for Jeskai Control, Jeskai Aggro Control / Control. More on the control end. Very, very flexible deck. My deck choice came down to I wanted to play a deck that would allow me to play into the long game, play one fair and interactive Magic so I can have fun, because I generally have more fun playing actually interactive Magic. Whether it's fair or not is up to debate, or whether it's fun or not is up to debate, but I have more fun doing that. And I also think Jeskai is a really great deck from the standpoint that it's very match neutral. So when you play a match neutral deck, it tends to mean you have game against an unknown metagame, which this first league structure run over Discord for Canadian Highlander on Moto definitely, I had no clue what I was going to be playing against. So I like this choice. It was really between this and 4-Color Blood for me, and I'm kind of glad I went with Jeskai because I got to play a lot of really cool long games. You get to see a lot of interesting interactions with this deck. The deck oftentimes, because of its high degree of mutability and flexibility, has to consistently be asking itself what role it wants to assume, whether you want to be the beatdown role or the control role. And, generally speaking, you're going in, attitude in control matchups is that you want to be the beatdown deck, and against, most other decks, you want to be the control. But even in this last game, you kind of got to see like an interesting dynamic where I think, Nathan's deck was far more set up to be a beatdown deck than mine was, but because of how the hands paired off, and the flexibility of our deck, we were able to actually choose the aggressive plan against them to basically to gain virtual advantage off of draw steps, because, Their deck is not intended to come back really from behind. It's intended to get ahead, stay ahead. I tend to think on blue-white tempo. And if we're able to, just get ahead before they are, then it's generally going to be easier because we just run more counter magic and we can just, stop. We can play more blue nonsense to stop their threats. So anyways, very, very, cool deck that I got to run. Very happy to have gotten to run it. Was really happy with how the deck performed and also just deck selection in general. And, if you're new to the format and you're, maybe like a frequent, legacy or vintage Xerox style player, I'd highly recommend the deck because I think the deck, one is very redolent of those style of decks in a lot of ways, more ways than one. And also offers a lot of very interesting decision-making, experiences, especially in Singleton, where it's a little more interesting because you don't always know exactly what your opponent's going to have. You can generally kind of guess, but and I think experience is going to benefit you in that situation as well with the format. But it's a good deck to get experience in because all of your decisions matter, and it's going to cause a lot more self-reflection loops than like a deck like Red Deck Wins is, where it's like sometimes you just win for free. Generally speaking, the Jeskai deck does not generally just win for free. It doesn't have a lot of I win cards. Sometimes it does. I mean, like I was saying, like Ancestral Recall is kind of an insidious I win card because in certain matchups it kind of is. If you resolve it first, generally you just win. But other matchups, definitely not. I mean, sometimes the tempo loss of casting Ancestral Recall, as small as it is, can be enough to actually cause you to lose because you're just not using your mana to proactively get after the board or win. You're using it to draw cards. But that's a very, very cool deck. Hope you guys enjoyed the video content. I am going to put a comment in the tags below so that all of the games can be searchable via timestamp, as well as the deck text, so you can jump around as you please. Definitely had a great time playing it. Hope if this is your first time viewing, you'll jump into the Canadian Highlander Discord and put a deck together on Moto and definitely give it a shot. And if you're a long-time player of the format, hope my commentary on this archetype and on the matchups proved to be of some value. I definitely went through a little more hasty than I normally do because it's a lot of games to digest. I'm a little bit distanced from it in time at this point. And frankly, I kind of had an upsetting moment the other night where I recorded all of these games and the deck tech, and my audio was straight up not working in the last 24 hours. So I was kind of frustrated, and I kind of wanted to get through it quickly, but still give it as much due diligence as I could so that it was both enjoyable and informative. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the content, and take care now.